Islamist terrorism?
Yes, I suppose that there is a strain in Islam, and I'm talking about not mainstream Islam, but the more extremists, that does not accept or tolerate others. I mean, I suppose you had this once upon a time in the Bible, where people were killing each other left, right, and centre. We had it with Christianity in the Middle Ages, when people were burnt at the stake for having the wrong views. Now, of course, Christianity is the mainstay of tolerance in this country, and has been very much involved in open faith dialogue. Maybe the Muslim world, which has always been very self-contained and has only recently come out of Arab countries. It's only recently, in the last 20, 30 years, that Muslims have been a minority in other countries. Maybe they need to go through some kind of reformation that adapts the traditions, the best of the traditions of Islam, to the realities of modern interfaith society. But I would just emphasize that this is an extreme strain. It is not mainstream Islam, which is why we talk about the three Abrahamic faiths, because we all have, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. We trace our ancestor as a common ancestor in Abraham. And if you look at the values of the Quran, the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible, they are very similar. And that's what makes this attack even more tragic, because it doesn't really represent Muslims, it doesn't represent Islam, and of course it doesn't do anything at all for Palestinians. If this was a protest for Palestinians, well, it doesn't help them one jot. If you want to help Palestinians, then donate to charities or send food or clothing. Shooting other people in Britain is just so ridiculously stupid. Unfortunately, it's horrendously tragic as well.
Well, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romain, thanks so much for joining us and speaking through this terrible day for Jewish people.
Very much. And just in the last few moments, the Prince and Princess of Wales have said in a personal message posted on social media, our thoughts are with the victims and the families of the terrible attack at Heaton Park Synagogue. The fact that this tragedy occurred on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, makes it all the more shocking. We are thinking of the entire community as well as the emergency responders who attended this terrible event. The message was signed W&C.
Well, do stay with us here on GB News. Martin Daubney will be taking you through the next 3 hours. But in the meantime, let's get an update with Charlie Peters.
Yom Kippur should be a day of reflection for British Jews. An opportunity to prepare for the new year and to go forward with a reflection on the year that has passed. But for Jews in Manchester this morning and those attending the synagogue, the shul in Crumpsall, it has been a day of appalling tragedy. And the emergency services from Greater Manchester Police, the North West Ambulance Service and indeed the Special Air Service have all deployed rapidly to that area 3 miles north of Manchester's city centre as tragedy returns once again to Manchester. This city is no stranger, appallingly and sadly, to terrorism. Of course, in 2017, Islamist suicide bombings rocked the country, not just in Manchester, but in London as well, other terrorist incidents there. And this area in Crumpsall also has endured appalling incidents in the past. In the early 2000s, in 2003, we saw a detective murdered during a bungled raid to detain international terrorists. Just 8 minutes walk away from the synagogue that was the site of this car ramming and stabbing attack this morning. Well, we have heard tributes from the Prince and Princess of Wales. We have heard tributes from the King, and the Prime Minister has rushed back to Britain for an urgent Cobra meeting following this attack in North Manchester. So Keir Starmer landed back in Britain around half an hour ago, and he will return to Downing Street before chairing that meeting. And he had been attending a European summit in Denmark focusing on the continent's security. But it is the security of Jews in Britain that will be at the forefront of this nation's thoughts this afternoon as we await further updates.
Thank you, Charlie Peters. Very good afternoon. It's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show. We're here on GB News for the next 3 hours for you. We're broadcasting live across the UK and we'll bring you all of the latest news on this terror attack on a Manchester synagogue, which has left 2 members of the public dead. and warning the following content may distress some viewers.
You've killed him. Hell, dude,
everybody else, get back! If you're not involved, move back! Get away! Somebody stay with casualties! Everybody else, he has a bomb! Go away!
He's got a bomb on him! He's got a bomb! Mate, he's got a... Man, he's got a bomb on his jacket, mate! He's trying to go in and... Now! He's got bombs on him!
Yeah, a dark day for the Jewish community in Britain and perhaps definitely around the world. What do we know so far? Let's bring you up to speed. We know that around about 9:30 a.m. this morning, police were called to an incident at the Heaton Park Synagogue, about 3 miles north of Manchester. An individual now believed to be a terrorist attacker used a car and a knife on people attending that synagogue. Later on, the suspect was then shot dead by police, who, absolute credit to the local police, they were very quick to respond, an armed unit. The individual wasn't responding to commands to stay on the floor. He was shot dead. He was reported to have been wearing what people believe to be a suicide belt and also what looked like a stab or a bullet-proof vest. The video you saw there is a shorter excerpt of a very harrowing and longer one taken by eyewitnesses at the scene. You can hear in that the voice of a local saying, "Get back, he has a bomb." He's trying to press a button. That local man was heard to be shouting. Shortly after that, the police, we now understand, shot that individual with fatal consequences. He was pronounced dead around about 15 or 20 minutes ago. And at that point, the process of identification can begin. People saying, why hasn't he been identified? The process is, until he's pronounced dead by the authorities, that process cannot continue. We are imminently going to cross to a press conference, a statement from Lawrence Taylor. He's the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, and we're expected to get more information from that when that happens. And of course, we'll be covering that live here on GB News. Now begins the search for answers. What drove this individual to commit this atrocious incident, of course, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar? Sir Keir Starmer has made an emergency return back to the United Kingdom. He was in Denmark to discuss, of all things, Britain's security. The security in Britain is now the preeminent affair of the Prime Minister having a Cobra meeting. There'll be a lot of questions that the British public are asking about the political backdrop, the social backdrop of how Britain seems to have changed since the Hamas pogrom of Israel. 5 days' time will be the second anniversary of October the 7th. Yesterday, we covered on GB News 3 Hamas terrorists arrested in Berlin on the eve of Yom Kippur. They were believed to have Kalashnikovs. Their targets were confirmed to be Jewish targets. And then today we woke up to this, and we're waiting for that imminent press conference there from Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, where we're expecting to hear more information. Under sad circumstances, I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by the Israeli journalist Emily Schrader. Emily, welcome to Westminster. I feel very emotional. You must be devastated. Today is a day of reflection, of prayer, of massive importance. And now this has happened. How are you feeling and how are the Jewish community is reacting to this?
Well, obviously, this is Devastating. I mean, this is the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, and to be targeted as a community on this day of all days has a specific significance that it's really hard to put into words. Unfortunately, at the same time, it's not that surprising. I mean, when we have seen almost 2 years now, will be the second anniversary of the October 7th massacre, we have seen a massive tsunami, as I heard earlier, of anti-Semitism, and that is absolutely true. And unfortunately, it's not just on the ground in Israel, as we see. It has been internationalized. And when you hear calls to globalize the Intifada, as we have seen in all of these protests week after week after week, what do you think that means? Intifada is a violent uprising, and this is what it looks like, targeting Jews who are attending synagogue, simply practicing their faith, and it's sickening.
Do you think, in a sense, one thing I'm hearing from Jewish friends of mine today is that it's a horrible word, but the word they're using is inevitable. This felt, in a sense, inevitable. We've seen this creep of anti-Semitism in this country. It's rocketed since October the 7th, almost 2 years ago. We've seen almost a tolerance on the streets. I myself went to a protest at Parliament Square where I think those shameful images from the river to the sea being projected on Big Ben were being projected around the world, bringing great shame on the United Kingdom. I begged police officers to take that projector down. They weren't interested. We saw those protests happening every single Saturday. We saw grotesque scenes at them. We saw grotesque placards held at them. A real sense of a deeply concerning rising tide of anti-Semitism, and now here we are.
Well, I think it's more than just anti-Semitism. It's a dehumanization, and it's a tolerance of violence. It's a tolerance of an idea that says you can kill someone. You can use physical force against someone simply because you disagree with a group, and in this case, a group that the Jews in the UK are not responsible for. They are not a part of the state of Israel. They're not responsible for Israeli policy, and yet we consistently see Jewish communities being blamed, being targeted, violence being perpetrated against individual Jews around the world in the name of Israel or Palestine or whatever conflict is going on thousands of kilometers away. And this is inherently wrong. It is always wrong. And the lack of accountability in a lot of these groups is what fuels this. So I do think that tragically, inevitable is the right word to describe this. And unfortunately, unless we see a strong crackdown on this type of behavior, this tolerance for intolerance, it will continue. Something has to be done. And you mentioned those protests. I myself have been in attendance in some of those protests as a journalist covering them, and the scenes are indeed horrific. The idea that people think they're entitled to violence against Jewish people because they don't like Israel is obscene. And instead of these people actually being prosecuted or held accountable who are spearheading this, in some cases, they're actually in government. And in other cases, they're arrested or moved away from the situation and then immediately released. That is not how you deter violence.
Just a quick reminder to those tuning in, we are anticipating in a short moment's time a statement from the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, and that is Lawrence Taylor, who will release more information. Of course, we'll bring you that live here on GB News. But Emily, I want to return to some of the backdrop of this. In January, we covered on GB News, a survey came out, 6 million British people are anti-Semitic. This was according to a study at the time by the Anti-Defamation League. A survey found that 12% of UK adults hold anti-Semitic attitudes, some of them utterly reprehensible. You know, the tropes of controlling money, of controlling government, of controlling power, of not being valid members of the population. Broaden that out globally, 46% of the world's population, the same study concluded, that's 2.2 billion people globally, hold anti-Semitic views. Where does this cancer come from?
Well, I think first and foremost, this cancer comes from extremism. But beyond that, I think what we've seen, especially in the last 2 years, honestly, and I say this as a journalist and it breaks my heart, but the media. I mean, the way that we have seen this conflict covered, the way that we have seen people excusing the types of behaviors that lead up to violence against Jewish people, they definitely bear responsibility. I mean, when you're talking about specific networks that refuse to call Hamas, for example, a terrorist organization, and I remind all of your audience that that Hamas are actively murdering Palestinian Gazans today. I mean, they have executed without any due process countless Gazans being accused of collaborating with Israel or simply opposing their rule in the Gaza Strip. This is not a pro-Palestinian organization to begin with. And yet we see people excusing it time after time, people refusing to condemn the actions of October 7th, thinking that that somehow is pro-Palestinian. A lot of these movements we're seeing that are very radical, that are excusing violence beyond just anti-Semitism, as I mentioned, this is the core of the problem. And when we fail to call that out for what it really is, we're actually emboldening it. There needs to be a strong, united voice against this. It's not left, it's not right, it's not wealthy, it's not poor. It's coming from all directions, and it needs to be condemned from all directions as well.
Emily Schrader, thanks for joining us, and I believe you're going to be sticking with us for the whole of the hour to give us your feedback. Again, just to remind viewers tuning in, we're expecting Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, to deliver a briefing shortly. We'll, of course, carry that live when it happens and get full reaction from Emily Schrader here in the studio. But let's now return to GB News' national reporter Charlie Peters for all of the very latest. Charlie, for those tuning in to the show today, bring us fully up to speed. What do we know thus far?
Well, Martin, we know that at 9:31 this morning, the police were called by a member of the public who had witnessed the start of this attack. Greater Manchester Police have praised that individual for so quickly getting in touch with the police, and they responded rapidly themselves. Within 6 minutes, they were on the scene, and within a minute of them arriving, armed officers, specialist firearms officers within Greater Manchester Police had fired shots at the attacker in this terror attack on a synagogue in northern Manchester. As it stands, 2 people have sadly died as a consequence of that car ramming and stabbing attack. 3 are still recovering in a serious condition in hospitals. And we have also learned from Greater Manchester Police after several hours that the attacker they shot has died. For a while, they said that he was believed to be dead and they were unable to inspect his body to provide an account of his status because he was wearing what appeared to be some form of device. We didn't know if it was viable or otherwise. We have seen in the past, Martin, terror attacks involving fake suicide vests, as recently as 2019 at the Fishmongers Hall attack in London. The terrorist there, Usman Khan, who killed 2 support workers who were guiding him from life after release from prison. He also wore a suicide vest, although that was deemed to be an inoperable asset, and he was shot by firearms officers in London. Now, since then, we have seen a widespread emergency services reaction involving not just Greater Manchester Police and their associated agencies, the North West Ambulance Service and the National Health Service, of course, but also 22 SAS, their permanent counter-terrorism squadron, the Eurocopter Dauphin, which is nicknamed Blue Lightning. Their air asset has been spotted on the scene. We do know that the Special Air Service was training in Manchester earlier this year with Special Forces soldiers seen going down ropes, rappelling off ropes from that same style of helicopter in a residential area in the city, and it looks as though that training was put into practice today with the counter-terrorism squadron of that unit deployed rapidly to the capital of the North in Manchester. Now, we have also observed several instances of police activity since then, with GB News cameras capturing police officers going down the White House Avenue nearby to this synagogue, just about a quarter of a mile away, and arresting 2 men in that location as well. But we're preparing for these press statements to get more information from the police to hopefully learn more about this attacker, this terror attack, who was seen holding a knife and a bulletproof vest before the incident was conducted.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlie Peters, there for bringing us up to speed. And just a quick reminder, if you're tuning into the show, we're expecting imminently a statement from Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard. We'll, of course, cross to that when it happens. But in the meantime, let's get live now to Crumpsall, the scene of the incident, and speak to GB News reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie Reaper, a dark day for Manchester, a dark day for the Jewish community in Britain and indeed around the entire world. A lot of people feeling there's a crushing sense of inevitability to this attack. attack today, but you've been speaking to people on the ground there. Tell us, what's the mood?
Well, Martin, the mood here is a sombre one. This, of course, the most important day today in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. This should have been a day that people all over the world would have been going to their synagogues for that sombre day of Yom Kippur. And that includes, of course, the synagogue here at Heaton Park. It should have been full of those of the Jewish faith worshipping, and instead the most unimaginable, horrific incident taking place here, which of course we now know two members of the public have lost their lives as a result. Now we are expecting in the next few minutes a statement from Chief Constable Sir Stephen Watson of Greater Manchester Police. We're expecting him to speak and address members of the press about what has happened here in Manchester today. As you also rightly say, we're expecting to hear from counter-terrorism police down in London as they respond to what's taken place. But this is a tight-knit community. We spoke to the MP earlier and he spoke about how they've come together already, about how it will impact his constituents and how this isn't the first time something like this has happened in Greater Manchester, unfortunately. But even at times like that, most memorably perhaps at the arena bomb, people came together and they supported those in the community who had been impacted. And I'm sure that's exactly what's going to be taking place here. I believe we can go now to the press conference in Manchester with GMP now.
It's happening at Scotland Yard. Let's cross that now.
Have died. The attacker has been shot dead by the police. We believe we know their identity, but for safety reasons at the scene, we're unable to confirm at this stage. 3 other members of the public are in a serious condition. We have also made 2 further arrests. And based on what we know, counter-terrorism policing has declared this as a terrorist incident. Our specialist teams are now leading the investigation into what happened at Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue and working closely with Greater Manchester Police. As we do this, those who have been killed and injured are at the forefront of our minds, as are their families, friends, and all of those who love them. An attack on our Jewish community today on Yom Kippur is devastating. Communities across the UK would normally be marking this holy day are now grieving and worried about their safety. And I want to be clear, UK policing is mobilising, and it's mobilising fast. Police forces are stepping up patrols across the country, at synagogues and Jewish sites, and more widely to provide reassurance to all those communities who have been affected by this incident. At Counter-Terrorism Police, we're deploying all of our capabilities in response to what has happened. And we have resources from across our network involved. We will ensure every piece of intelligence and line of inquiry is interrogated. We're working closely with the security services to ensure we have a full intelligence picture in the coming days and weeks. Following events in Crumpsall today, I'd also like to ask the public to remain vigilant. Please report anything that doesn't feel right to the police and be alert to what is happening in your own communities. Thank you.
OK, that was a short statement there. No media responses or questions were permitted, it seems. That was Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism, delivering a short statement there at New Scotland Yard. It was brief. Let me just fill you in to what was said. The key point here, I believe, was Lawrence Taylor said, "We believe we know the identity of the suspect, but for safety reasons, we cannot confirm it." Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why the individual's details weren't released sooner. For example, you recall after the Liverpool attack, it was less than an hour and a half where the white man was identified. But we were told in this instance that for reasons of safety, because there was a device potentially around this individual's midriff, that it had to wait until it was safe. That was the police line. So just to repeat, we believe we know their identity, but for safety reasons, we cannot confirm. There have been 2 other arrests in association with this individual. And then Lawrence Taylor went on to say those who have been killed or injured are at the front of our minds. And we talked about how on Yom Kippur, communities would normally be laughing and praying, but of course today they are not. And as a note of reassurance, although I would question this actually maybe as a source of great national shame to us, he then said, don't worry, we'll be mobilising and deploying additional security at British synagogues. It just seems incredible to me that the response is to send out more security. Emily Schrafer, let's get a quick bit of response from you. You listened into that, and you and I both, I think we're, in a sense, saddened by the sense that the British state's response is to send more security out, and the optics of that and the message that sends out and the reality of the situation is that the Jewish community as a whole in Britain is very much on edge and perhaps unsafe today.
I mean, I think it's been true for a long time that the Jewish community in the UK is under threat. And, you know, I appreciate that they're doing the best they can now, but this should have been done a long time ago. It should have been dealt with before. And to say that they didn't know or that they didn't have an idea, I mean, the Islamic Republic of Iran itself has threatened how many times Jewish communities, the Israeli embassy, individuals here in the UK? It's outrageous. It's outrageous what's been allowed to continue. It's outrageous that they have failed to rein it in, that they failed to hold them accountable, and that is exactly why it is inevitable. And the answer to that, of course, we need to be responsible and we need to have security, but we also need accountability. And without accountability, there is no deterrence, and it's not going to change. And for this to happen on Yom Kippur, of all days, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, when almost everyone, even secular Jews, will go to synagogue to atone. It's the Day of Atonement, a day of reflection, and to have that be the target, it is symbolic, and it's symbolic just the same way that the October 7th massacre on Simchat Torah, which is considered one of the most joyous days of the Jewish calendar, was carried out on October 7th by Hamas. It's the same ideology of hatred, and excuse-making will only make it worse.
And of course, Yom Kippur, also the day that Hamas attacked Israel in 2023, and also the Arab states invaded Israel in 1973. So it is a moment of specific relevance, weakness and vulnerability, and totemic, obviously, in why it's used as a moment to attack the Jewish community. Thank you very much, Emily. Please stick with us for the rest of the hour. But for more reaction, I'm now joined by the head of security and extremism at the Policy Exchange, Paul Stott. Paul, welcome to the show. A pleasure to have your company on such, let's be honest, a dark day not just in Britain, not just for the Jewish community, but I think for all of us. We have a lot of thinking to do about where we are as a nation. We need to have a period of great reflection, I believe, and perhaps the political class needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror at how we got to where we are today.
I think that's right, Martin, and unfortunately it's a road that we've been travelling on for some years, and indeed I was just going back through some bits and pieces on anti-Semitic terrorism in Greater Manchester, and you know, there was a terror plot targeting local Jews way back. 2 people were convicted in 2012, so you know, this certainly predates 7/10. We've, I think, got a reaction from others, and indeed one that I would echo, that whilst this is shocking and horrific, the one thing it is not is a surprise.
And Paul Stott, we were speaking here in the studio, myself and Emily Schrader, that, you know, globally, we seem to have this, I hate to use the word two-tier, but, you know, we have had a two-tiered approach, many people think, to how this has been policed in terms of the protests since October the 7th 2 years ago. In the actions on the streets, we've seen people clambering over war memorials, we've seen grotesque anti-Semitic signage, we've seen children dressed as suicide bombers with police posing for selfies with them. I mean, we've just seen stuff on the British streets that if it were flipped, if this was some kind of mythical far right, there'd have been a huge, huge clampdown. Am I completely unfounded here in saying there has been a kind of soft mollycoddling of this type of protest, and perhaps that's emboldened people out there, and in the end, there's going to be somebody out there who will take it too far?
Well, there are unfortunately, other examples, Martin, you could have given there. And indeed, you may remember how the authorities seemed to struggle to take any action when people, I think back in 2023, were calling for jihad on some of these protests. And there was a lot of sort of weasel words from the authorities as to why people couldn't be prosecuted. I mean, if you want to know the reality, you actually have to look at the what happened today, but also the fact that there seems to have been some sterling work done by the security team at this synagogue. There's no doubt at the local level, people know full well what the threat is, and they know they have to react to it. And in doing so, may well have saved further lives today. So the people out there do know. It's whether the authorities have got the strategy right for countering this and whether they've been using all the tools that they have in order to respond properly. And that's going to be the debate that we'll have to have over the next few weeks.
Paul Stott, in the aftermath of the Manchester Arena bombing in 2017, which killed 22, including young girls, and it injured over 1,000 others, it was don't look back in anger. It was let's light candles, let's have prayers. Hasn't worked. That approach hasn't worked, has it? It hasn't worked to ask for together. And nobody is saying here that we should have more division, but I'm putting it to you from a security and an extremism point of view, Paul Stott. We've got to do more than just expecting people to pray and move on now.
Well, the response shouldn't be to hold hands and light candles. The response should be to get it right. So we put these attackers and those who support them, those who encourage and those who've brought us to this situation, that we can put them to flight. That's the response that we need, and that's the debate we must have in the next few weeks. I mean, you mentioned obviously the Manchester Arena response, but if you think back to the attack on Sir David Amess, we seem to have some very peculiar debates there, not about Islamic State or terrorism, but about social media and people saying things on social media, an entirely misguided debate. So this time we need to get the focus right. And that's what we should be concentrating on over the next few days and weeks.
Paul Stott, can I ask you a question, a bit of a curveball here, but it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've spoken to so many people from the campaign against anti-Semitism, so many Jewish writers, campaigners, practitioners, and they've all said one thing to me: there's going to be an attack on British soil at some point in the future, and it's happened. And do you think it's fair to say that anti-Semitism is almost now the acceptable form of racism in Britain? It's almost fashionable amongst the middle classes, almost fashionable amongst the intelligentsia and the liberal left. And of course, alongside that, and we don't know the motives of today's individual yet, we may learn more as the hours move by, but then of course we can dovetail into that the rise of radical Islamism. We seem to have this unholy brew that's happening in Britain that ferments the kind of hatred that results in something like today.
I think it's been one of the characteristics of anti-Semitism that it sort of receives new blasts of support from different angles, from different areas, different ideological belief systems. I mean, you've touched there on the Islamist strand to it. You could have the far right, to an extent the far left, and also a whole mountain of nonsense which comes from conspiracy theorists and other such people. So when you add all that together, it becomes a real problem, and that's going to be one of the debates over the next few weeks. How do we cut this problem? How do we, if you like, begin to lance the boil? Because this has been predictable for a very long time, I'm afraid.
Okay, Paul Stott, thank you for your expertise joining us today. That's the head of security and extremism at the Policy Exchange. Paul Stott, thank you for joining us. Well, throughout the day, local residents have spoken to us at GB News following the attack in Manchester, and let's take a listen to what they've told us.
Very, very nervous at the moment, and they feel very vulnerable, as we do. you know, especially, you know, the Jewish schools, the synagogues, you know, it's a big Jewish community here.
And I don't understand why, because we just want to live and let live.
Been unfortunately many times in war zone countries, so unfortunately I do know the sound of shots. So when I heard that, I said, that sounds like shots. And then a couple of minutes later I heard multiple sirens and then helicopters, etc. I realised something was going on. Police wouldn't even allow us out of our flats. And later on, police came and evacuated us from our flat. As I was walking down the road, I did see the rabbi of the synagogue, Rabbi Walker, and now today it's a day of prayer. So when we pray with a long white robe, and I saw at the bottom of his robe there was blood on it. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that he'll sort out more armed police for synagogue. And I'm saying straight out to him, straight out, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, we don't need more armed police. What we need is projects of dialogue, of people understanding each other's faiths from different areas, from different aspects.
Well, huge concern there on the streets of Manchester, and who can blame the residents there? Let's get back to the studio now, and I'm joined by the former Scotland Yard detective, Peter Blaxley. Peter, always a pleasure to have your company, even on this austere day. I wanted to ask you, Peter, about the police response. I think first and foremost, the response, the fatal response of the police to do their job, to deploy their firearms, was swift and commendable, and in your opinion, they carried out that manoeuvre perfectly.
I think the swift action and the shooting dead of this man, not only was it professional to the nth degree, but let's imagine the courage of those officers, because they, I'm sure, will have seen the device strapped around that man's waist, and they will not have known whether that is viable or not. And without a thought for themselves, but merely with thoughts of protecting the public, they challenged him, they shot him, and I doff my cap to them.
Now, just so if you're tuning in, we have live pictures on our screen there. That is the shot down Downing Street. Of course, we're expecting the Prime Minister to come through those gates imminently. The Prime Minister, of course, was in Copenhagen for, of all things, a global security summit. He's had to fly back to deal with a security catastrophe in the United Kingdom. We're expecting Keir Starmer to come through those gates of Downing Street imminently. Of course, we'll carry those pictures live as it happens. But Peter Blaxley, back to you. A lot of people are asking a question. Why haven't we been given the identity of this individual yet? Because we heard in the past, particularly post-Southport, and especially the Liverpool terror incident, where an individual drove a car into the crowd where Liverpool was celebrating their Premier League trophy. Within, I think, about 90 minutes, he was identified as a white man. No identity forthcoming yet. Explain to us why you think that's just the way it is today.
Well, that Liverpool incident and the horror we're dealing with today are very different types of incidents. And of course, we saw the head of counter-terrorism policing talking about they haven't identified this man or given his identity to the public because of safety reasons. And I'll tell you why that could possibly be. We know that 2 other members of this terrorist cell, I would suggest, have been arrested. There's a dead member of this cell. So that means there are at least 3 addresses which will need to be searched thoroughly. There could be viable booby-trap devices at those addresses, specifically designed to kill and maim. What the police will not want is the identity of a man being released to the public and curious members of the public turning this into some kind of sideshow that they want to go and watch. So there's very much valid safety issues at play here.
So I just want to be clear about this, because we've seen in the past, there's been a misinformation put out there, and in fact, the police took the decision in Liverpool to release the identity of the white man in question, to kind of clamp down on any conspiracy theories that it may have been for a different motive. So, but you're saying in this instance, they're not withholding it. This is completely normal. This is the police doing their job, and people just need to be patient and wait.
This is safety and this is sensible. That man, there's clear images of him already been released in the media. Somebody watching the television today will have gone, I know who that is, and I know where they live. The last thing the police want when they could be dealing with premises booby-trapped with bombs, for example, is members of the public going there and putting themselves at risk.
Good. I wanted to have that conversation on the show because I think it's responsible just to explain that the police are doing their job and that they're not withholding information, as people are saying on the internet. This is the police doing their job, and we need to be patient and allow them to do it. And indeed there, Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, he did say, we believe we know their identity. Peter Blexley, that means that they do know, right? They do know who this is, but they need to be absolutely sure and go through due process.
Undoubtedly, and there's 2 other people being arrested. Yet again, think of the worst-case scenario. There could be 3 addresses out there, all booby-trapped with bombs that would blow many, many people to smithereens. Possibly, potentially. The police have to think about the protection and the preservation of life, not only the public, but their officers. I am the first to chide the police when they get it wrong. In this case, withholding the identity at the moment is sensible.
Peter Blexley, I just want to ask you as well about the statement there from Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terror at New Scotland Yard. He said to us, relax, more or less. We will be mobilising and deploying additional security at British synagogues. Now, on the one hand, that's reassuring. On the other hand, Peter Blexley, it's a terrible admission that we seem to be losing control of what's happening on British streets.
It really is. And, of course, a multiple casualty attack like this is utterly horrendous and unforgivable. The police will, of course, reflect on what they've done or what they may not have done today, but today, Yom Kippur, the most valuable, important day in the Jewish calendar. Perhaps the swift response was because policing had put measures in place. Perhaps it was just through good fortune. We will have to wait and see. But my thoughts go out to the Jewish community in this country, a community that is 1/10 of the size of the Muslim community, for example, but no less deserving of all the protection that it can possibly be afforded.
Peter Blexley, thank you for those words, and thanks for, responsibly and calmly bringing us up to speed, because we need to be responsible and calm. That's our job. Peter Blexley, thank you. Just got some live pictures on our screen now, I believe, from Downing Street. We are expecting the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, imminently to come through those gates at the bottom of Downing Street there. Of course, Keir Starmer had been in Copenhagen for a World Security Summit, of all things. Now having to return to Britain because there has been a huge security lapse. There has been a huge incident, and one I think that will not only concern the Jewish community in Britain, not only concern all British citizens, but I think will send shockwaves around the world as to the direction of travel. Let's get back to the studio and bring Emily Schrader back into the conversation. Emily, I want to ask you about the recognition of Palestine as a state. It's the darling opinion of the political left. It's the opinion of the Labour government. I think live pictures on our screen now, we can see that is the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, driving into Downing Street with a full police escort. We are expecting the Prime Minister to attend an emergency Cobra meeting about what happened this morning in Manchester at the Heaton Park Synagogue, 3 miles north of Manchester. 2 dead at the scene, 2 individuals who were citizens, and of course the suspect himself shot dead. There is the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, emerging from his car and solemnly walking into 10 Downing Street. We believe the Cobra cabinet is inside waiting for him. And of course, when news comes out of what goes on in that meeting, we'll of course bring it to you here on GBNews. The Prime Minister returning to Downing Street to face a domestic crisis. Let's be absolutely honest, this is a domestic crisis, the crisis of confidence, and certainly a crisis for the Jewish community in Britain. There'll be some deep searching questions asked in that meeting about how the Jewish community now is feeling increasingly unsafe. And let's, on that point, bring in Emily Schrader. Emily, I was just about to ask you, and I'll repeat the question, the recognition of the state of Palestine, it was almost the top thing that the Labour Party seemed to be most proud of at their conference this week. David Lammy could barely contain his excitement. I wonder, A lot of people have been critical of that. Is it rewarding terrorism? Is it a factor in emboldening the voices? And is it all part of the jigsaw? Is it just one of those factors that could embolden a psychopath to do something like he did today?
Well, I mean, I think it's too early to say if there's a direct connection to something like that.
I'm not saying there's a direct connection. I'm just saying, has there been a direction of travel, a headwind?
Yes, so the concerning trend and what we have been warning against for many weeks when it comes to the UK, France, and other countries that have recognized Palestine isn't just that it's rewarding terrorism, but, you know, one of the things that I'm very active on is hostage-taking. It's rewarding hostage-taking and it's incentivizing it. And so to do a move like this politically at a time when there are still 48 hostages being held by a UK-designated terrorist organization, Hamas, is extremely concerning. It sends a very, very bad message. It sets a very bad precedent. And the, you know, celebration and embrace of this as if it's something so wonderful when we don't have a solution. When, as I speak right now, Hamas has still not accepted a ceasefire offer, despite the fact that almost the entire Arab world is calling on them to accept it. It's extremely concerning. It sends the wrong message. And I do think that it does have an impact. We have to remember that some of these Islamist extremists that engage in these kinds of acts of terrorism, they aren't thinking the same way that we do in the Western world. They're coming from a different perspective, a very extremist ideology and a way of seeing the world. And I think a lot of times in the West, we fail to understand the connection. And when you embolden extremism this way and you don't shut it down and there isn't accountability, of course, it's going to embolden acts like this. So again, as you stated, we don't know that there's any kind of direct connection, but it is concerning to see the embrace of this sort of radicalism and moves that do indeed embolden it. And not only that, David Lammy has made repeated statements against Israel at a time when all it's really doing is emboldening Hamas. It is making negotiations on the ground in Israel, as Israeli officials have said, more difficult on the ground. And it's something that I've reported on extensively. It doesn't help. You're not causing a solution because there is no actual governance in Palestine right now. Hamas is still in somewhat control in Gaza. So why are you recognizing a Palestinian state?
Peter Blexley, I'd like to bring you back in now, if I could, in terms of what you believe may happen next. We believe we're going to hear a statement from Manchester, from Crumpsall, in a short while on the synagogue attack. But in terms of when will we know any potential identity and or motives behind this? Of course, we heard there from Lawrence Taylor at Scotland Yard that we believe we know the identity, and we, just to repeat for those tuning in, 2 other arrests have been made at 2 other addresses. So, as you said, there's a process to go through of searching properties. As you say, the image is out there, this individual. People will know him. And the modus operandi seems to indicate that this is motivated, certainly, against the Jewish faith. When do you think we're going to start to get something more concrete from the authorities?
As soon as there is no further threat to the safety of anybody, be that the public or police officers, who may have to go through the doors of the addresses of these people who have been arrested in order to search them, but to search for evidence, perhaps crucial evidence, to implicate others, maybe identify even further members of a terrorist cell who we simply don't know about at the moment. The police have a wealth of work on their hands at the moment, and we heard that they have deployed every counter-terrorism resource in the country to this investigation. That gives us some idea of the scale of the amount of work that the police have to do. Please, I urge everybody, do not speculate. I'm not a police mouthpiece, but there are potentially further lives at risk here.
OK, thank you, Peter Blakely. Now, just if you're tuning in, it's 3:45. Let's just bring you up to speed of what's happening and what's happened today. To repeat, 2 confirmed dead at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, 3 miles north of Manchester. Further casualty was the suspect shot dead by armed police when he was told to stay on the ground and refused to comply. Further information, believed to be wearing a suicide belt, or what looked like a suicide belt. No chances clearly were taken. And also a stab vest. A harrowing video from the arrest and the shooting itself of a local saying, "Get back, he's got a bomb, he's going to press a button." And there was also what we now believe to be a dead body on the floor. A car was used A knife was used. It was on Yom Kippur, the most sacred of Jewish days, and it's precipitated the return to the United Kingdom of the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. And on that point, let's go now to GB News political editor Chris Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. So Sir Keir Starmer, with no irony, was meant to be speaking in Copenhagen this afternoon about global security. Instead, he's been forced into a hasty return to the United Kingdom, where we have our own very, very grave security situation.
Yeah, that's right, Martin. I'm now here in 10 Downing Street, obviously come back from the Labour conference, all that's been forgotten from earlier this week. He arrived moments ago looking ashen-faced, grim-faced. Questions were shouted to him. How will you reassure the Jewish community? How will you keep Synagogue safe? He didn't look or respond or pose for photographs. Straight in, head down, with National Security Advisor Jonathan Powell. Also in the meeting, we think, is the Assistant Commissioner from the Met Police, Lawrence Taylor. He gave that statement live on GB News within the last half an hour. And we think Steve Reed, who of course is the Community Secretary, we think he's entered via 70 Whitehall on Whitehall to the Cabinet Office. They're all going down to a room called Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. That's why it's called Cobra. That meeting's scheduled to start within a few minutes. And then after that, we'll get some form of briefing from the Prime Minister, some form of statement. And I wonder whether they may want to do something on camera to reassure Jewish communities and people in synagogues that they are safe, they are being looked after by the government. And that's why we heard from the tarmac at Copenhagen Airport from the Prime Minister, him saying there that additional police assets are being deployed to synagogues across the country, and will do everything to keep our Jewish community safe. And it's that commitment, everything to keep them safe, I think, which many people in that Jewish community need to hear from that Prime Minister, probably on camera.
Chris Hope, I wonder, been talking here in the studio with Emily Schrader, and a lot of people that have on the show from the Jewish community over these past 2 years have been grimly predicting something like today could happen. But the political class don't seem to have been especially listening. This week at the Labour Party conference, we saw the state of Palestine, its recognition being heralded. We heard a lot about the far right. We heard a lot from Shabana Mahmood saying she knew how it felt to be a British Muslim post 9/11 and post 7/7. We didn't hear anything about anti-Semitism. Chris Hope, it struck me as extraordinary at the time. In fact, I mentioned it on my show. Anti-Semitism seems to be rife, and it seems to be not really talked about by the political class. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a problem, of course, in France and other countries too, not just in the UK. I mean, the context is in the past 10 days, I should say, the UK government has recognised Palestine as an independent state. Of course, Israel and the Jewish community are different things, but I think the Jewish community here wants to hear a reassurance from the Prime Minister that it's looking out for them. This is really, really worrying. Of course, what happened, those dreadful scenes we're seeing from Greater Manchester. Now's the time, I think, for the Prime Minister to step up and reassure the wider Jewish community, and also give us an indication of what's happening in terms of dealing with why this happened, whether other people were involved too.
Thank you, Chris Hope. As you say there, Sir Keir Starmer in Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, Cobra, for an emergency crisis meeting, let's be frank, and we're expecting a statement from the Prime Minister later on in the afternoon. And of course, we'll bring that to you live on GB News as it happens. I want to come back to the studio and get some response from Emily Schrader. Emily, you were listening to that, and when Chris Hope there said we're expecting the Prime Minister to address the nation and give a statement, you kind of rolled your eyes. And I wanted to ask you why, because I suspect you're expecting to hear the same old platitudes.
Absolutely.
And what does the Prime Minister need to say to you to make you and British Jews feel more reassured and feel more safe today?
I don't think there's anything that he can say. I think that it's too late for this government. I mean, when you have someone like Shabana Mahmood being the secretary who was previously part of the anti-Israel protest movement, and I say anti-Israel because it is not pro-Palestinian. I mean, what can you say? They're so clearly refusing to deal with this issue for many years now. So it doesn't really matter what he says. It doesn't really matter if you, provide more security. That's not the heart of the problem. And so to see someone engage in the same terror tactics that we see all the time in Israel from Palestinian terrorists, car rammings, stabbing attacks, suicide bombings. That's not out of nowhere, and it's certainly not out of nowhere when it comes to being done on Yom Kippur of all days. This is a targeted attack against the Jewish community. It's what we have been warning about for years. And when Israel does it every time this happens...
We have to cross live. We have a statement.
This attack has been officially declared as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is now being led by counter-terrorist police. As has been confirmed by CT policing, we believe that the identity of the offender has been established, but until we are certain of this fact, it is premature to set out this detail at this juncture. In addition, I can confirm that 2 other individuals have been arrested in connection with this incident, and urgent inquiries are ongoing. We can confirm that 2 members of our Jewish community have sadly died as a result of this attack. Following a rapid response, armed officers from Greater Manchester Police intercepted the offender, and he was fatally shot by officers within 7 minutes of the original call. 4 further people remain in hospital, having suffered a variety of serious injuries, and their treatment is ongoing, and our thoughts are with them and their families. Inquiries are moving at pace, and very visible and proactive policing activity is ongoing across Greater Manchester and beyond. Updates will be provided as soon as is practicable. Our priority is to keep the public safe. At this time, we know that a car was driven directly at members of the public outside the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue on Middleton Road, Crumpsall, in Manchester. The driver of the car was seen then to attack people with a knife. He was wearing about his body a vest which had the appearance of an explosive device. There were a large number of worshippers attending the synagogue at the time of this attack, but thanks to the immediate bravery of security staff and the worshippers inside, as well as the fast response of the police, the attacker was prevented from gaining access. All those inside were safely contained until police were able to confirm that it was safe to leave the premises. Yom Kippur is a day where we see our Jewish community attending their places of worship, places where they and their families should feel entirely safe from harm. I want to share my gratitude to all of those members of the public who called the police as soon as they saw what was happening. This allowed the quick response from our officers, who were able to act swiftly and bravely to bring this horrendous attack to an end. I also want to thank our partners from the other emergency services, local authorities, and the health service, who have provided their ongoing support to us throughout the day and will continue so to do over the coming days. I know that today's horrific events will have a significant impact on all of our communities, not only in Greater Manchester, but across our country. There will be lots of questions that people would like answers to, and quickly. But please understand that some of this will take time. What I can say is that the highly visible response to these dreadful incidents will be sustained as we work to understand the full circumstances of what has happened. I know that you will all join me in keeping those directly affected by what has happened in our thoughts and prayers. There are grieving families and communities at the heart of this, in Greater Manchester and beyond. I would therefore ask that people refrain from sharing disturbing and insensitive content online. If you have information then share it with the police. We stand with all of those affected and will continue to do everything in our power to keep our communities safe. I thank you.
A sombre and a grave statement there has to be said from the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Stephen Watson, confirming 2 members of Manchester's Jewish community have died at that synagogue attack earlier on today, around about 9:30 a.m. this morning. Confirmation that a car was driven directly at the public. The driver then left the car and attacked people with a knife. He was wearing a belt that had the appearance of an explosive device and also a vest, which looked like a bulletproof vest. And I think this is the most harrowing part of what he just said. The immediate bravery of security and worshippers meant he did not get inside the synagogue. Just think what could have happened if he had got inside that synagogue and if that had been an explosive device he was wearing. It's almost too much to comprehend. But that didn't happen. He was prevented from getting inside by whoever those people were. They deserve the highest bravery award in the land. I'm just astonished by people's bravery. He then went on to say, Stephen Watson, synagogues should be a place where people feel safe. 4 people remain in hospital. And he added, Stephen Watson, please refrain from sharing sensitive information. That ship may have sailed. The videos are all over the world, to Britain's great and eternal shame. Stephen Watson there laying out what is an increasingly sombre situation. But I guess, returning to the studio now, I'm still with Emily Schrader and Peter Bexley. I think we have to be grateful. I'm just trying to find something remotely positive here. Don't we just have to be grateful that he didn't get inside the synagogue? And then we have to be grateful that this ended. 2 people can never come back. But it could have been much, much worse, Peter Bexley.
Yes, I find it rather challenging to use the word grateful on such a horrific day. Certainly in terms of the courage that Chief Constable Watson spoke about from the officers that confronted, challenged and shot this man dead. I echo those sentiments entirely. But for me, from a very much policing perspective, the big takeaway from what the Chief Constable said was that there are inquiries in Greater Manchester and beyond. And when we tie that into the statement from the head of counter-terror policing that we had a bit earlier on, it might give you some kind of scale of what the police are investigating and how perhaps widespread this cell may have been and its level of hatred towards the Jewish community.
And Peter Bexley, is worth reinforcing a point that we made earlier on, and that's Stephen Watson there confirmed the identity of the individual has been established, but we don't want to release it at this moment until it's safe to do so. So what you're inferring from your huge policing experience is that the investigation is ongoing and other people are involved, and releasing his identity, the deceased, what may in some way facilitate some of the bad people?
It could attract people who know him and know where he lives to then go to his house. And to reiterate what I said earlier on, that could be booby-trapped with bombs, for example. Now, that is, of course, one of the worst-case scenarios, but the police have to protect the public and they have to protect their own officers. So when it is safe for the police to disclose this man's identity, they will. But there's 2 other arrests, 2 other people in custody. So there's at the very minimum 3 addresses of huge interest, I would suggest. And we don't know how far wider this cell may or may not be connected. We know the police inquiries are going beyond Manchester.
Some pictures just emerging now from the Reuters agency. We'll try and get them up maybe. It's of the deceased lying on the ground with a robotic bomb disposal device near him, and flowers scattered, plant pots scattered. And it just really brings it home of how this was such an ordinary, everyday, beautiful moment that's been forever tainted. Emily Schrader, I wanted to get your take on a specific line there that Stephen Watson said, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. Synagogues should be a place where people feel safe. And you just shook your head. You don't believe that's the case anymore, do you?
Absolutely not. I mean, for all of my life, we have dealt with an extreme level of security in synagogues, whether in the United States or in Europe, throughout Europe, especially now, even in the state of Israel. These have been a target of specifically Islamist terrorism, and I think this is something that hasn't been adequately dealt with. And I do agree with the assessment in regards to, not necessarily releasing the name, not only because there are 3 different addresses, as Peter mentioned, but even further than that, if this is something that's being orchestrated at a greater level, they obviously have to investigate that, and revealing all your cards is never a good idea. I would expect to see similar behavior from any Israeli security forces in a similar situation, so we do have to wait and see what's going to happen with that. But in regards to feeling safe, of course we don't feel safe. Of course we don't feel safe. Of course the Jewish community doesn't feel safe. They've been screaming from the rooftops about this for years. And it's because of incidents like this, and it's because of how they've been handled in the past. I hope that it's different this time. I hope that they're able to deal with this in a more adequate way. But of course, there's no sense of safety on the ground, as a Jewish individual here in the UK. I can't even go on the subway here wearing this necklace of the state of Israel, my country, because I'm going to be harassed by other people or potentially attacked, which, by the way, happened just a few days ago here in the UK. Just someone overhearing a conversation where the word Israel was mentioned, and I immediately got a response saying, "Oh, are you Israeli?" So this is an unacceptable phenomenon that's happening. The level of hatred that's been tolerated must be dealt with beyond the security situation, because it impacts the security situation.
Emily, it brings me a great sense of shame. It really does. I'm not even Jewish, man. And it just gives me such a great sense of shame to hear that. That you don't feel safe on our soil. It really, really upsets and bothers me. It really, really does. I just can't believe we've got to this position. Let's bring in my next guest now. I'm joined by the former Home Office security and counter-terrorism expert, Kevin Jewell. Kevin, welcome to the show. It's a dark day, but we have to try and make some sense of it. We have to comb through what we know, and more to the point, details emerging there from Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, about what could have happened. Astonishing scenes, the information, the quote here is, "The immediate bravery of security and worshippers prevented him from getting inside," confirming then that statement he was believed to be wearing what looked like an explosive device. Kevin Jewell, you can only think of what might have happened if it got inside.
Yeah, good afternoon. As you say, we can only dread to think what would have happened, and I really do hesitate to use the word positive on a dark day like this. But reflecting on some of the other conversations, and that will be, of absolutely probably reassurance at the moment to the Jewish community. But I do know a lot of work has been going on with communities, Jewish communities and other communities, to try and work with the communities to make places of faith safer. It's a terrible situation we're in where we have to do that. But that's where we are at the moment. And I say I hate to use the word positive on a day like this, but I would think that some training has taken place, and the staff there are to be absolutely commended on putting their own lives on the line to protect those who are inside.
And as Peter Blexley mentioned there, a key piece of information that came out was in the Manchester area and beyond. So it seems to be the first indication that this might be fanning out into something more regional, more nationwide.
Yeah, as I've seen recent attacks on this programme and others, Martin, this is it's still the beginning stages, really. I've worked in previous roles on a national exercising, CT exercising team at the Home Office, and the authorities, bodies, agencies are rehearsed in doing this. And of course, let's not forget the security services and the police do things with regard to intelligence gathering on a day-to-day basis. But there will be a massive, massive amount of work going on behind the scenes. The Cobra meeting is probably taking place either now or very shortly. And the main purpose of that is it's not a decision-making body per se. It's very strategic, making sure that the police have got what they need, making sure that the health service for the people that have been displaced with the local councils. I'd imagine, I'd be surprised if the Mayor of Manchester isn't in that meeting, probably the Mayor of London as well. And it's a chance for everyone to bring together to say what they know and to make sure that we can go into this kind of next stage, which is kind of consequence management, to manage the investigation, to bring any other threat or stop any other threat, and also the consequence management around this community are going to suffer for years and years to come, unfortunately. And remember this.
Kevin Jewell, have we got a political blind spot around anti-Semitism? It's something we talk about a lot here on GB News, and it's something that Jewish contributors say to me all the time. They just don't think that anti-Semitism is taken anywhere near seriously enough. We hear all the time about the far right. We hear all the time about how we must protect certain communities, and the Jewish community don't seem to get enough political leverage. And the reality of the actual terror threats, when you forget about the hot air from politicians, the reality is that most terror threats on British soil are coming from radical Islamists. Now, we're not speculating about this case, I hasten to add. I'm talking broader. That's the backdrop. We're having a Cobra meeting again, another Cobra meeting with the Prime Minister expected to deliver a statement later on. When are our politicians going to wake up and smell the coffee?
As I said earlier, and I am hesitant to delve right down into the political aspects, because there's far greater voices than mine around that. But that's not to say, what you mentioned there, Martin, is, this is a target. The Jewish community are a target. I've kind of taken a step upwards. It's there will be, and I have no joy in saying this, there will be other attacks, and that's whether it's the Jewish community or whether it's on people going about their business in high streets. There's two elements to it as far as I'm concerned. There is the political aspect and what motivates people to do attacks and what makes people targets. And we know a lot going on in the Middle East, and you just summarised it there around the Israelis being targets. But just as important than that is what then drives someone to go over that mark to actually decide to be emboldened, if you like, to go and carry out an attack. And that, a lot more work needs doing around that as well. And we've talked before around the prevent system. But there is an awful lot of work as well as to what takes a person to a stage of thinking that they can go over that line and actually commit an attack.
Well, what do you think is the answer to that? I mean, what is it that would push somebody? You work in counter-terrorism. You get inside the mindset of individuals, of individual terrorists, of terrorist cells. You know your stuff. What is it that specifically seems to make people feel it's a viable target to go to a synagogue?
Yeah, so going back with regards to the London attacks, we were talking a cell of people, and they were, if you like, almost inspiring one another through ISIS. But going back to your question, what makes someone do it? We're looking more recently at, as is termed, the lone actors, and it does come back to, in my opinion, a vulnerability issue. And what I mean by that is they are either targeted by someone to be radicalised, or they are easily influenced. If we flip it onto the extreme right wing, drastic extremism, when I left the police service, there was an awful lot of youngsters. We're talking 12, 13-year-olds who had been identified and, in fact, groomed to go down that path. And that's where a lot of this has to be addressed, whether it's schools, obviously at that young age, or the communities as to what's happening. But we are going down that road now of people being either self-radicalised or being targeted because of their vulnerability.
Kevin, you mentioned the far right there. I'm not about to have a go at you on a day like today, but we hear a lot about the far right, but we don't hear perhaps enough about the specific tensions that exist between the Jewish community and the more radicalised Muslim community in this country. Now, I'm not speculating as to the motives of this individual. Putting that to one side, I'm talking in the broader term here. Lone wolves, people being targeted on the internet, we hear this all the time. Is there not a case to be made, though, for a more binding methodology, a more binding hatred? And we must look this straight in the mirror and say we've got a problem with radical Islam on British soil.
Absolutely. And I wasn't, as going back to your comments earlier, Martin, around we need to remain calm and rational about this. We don't know for certain the ideology of the person who's carried out this attack. And I was using the extreme right wing because, again, not going down the political view as to certain politicians' views as to what you say and whether that makes you right wing or not. I was going down the example of the fact that people can be radicalised. But coming back to your point, absolutely, across the board, we need to call out where people are overstepping the line with regard to their rhetoric and their hate speeches. That's a given for me.
Thank you very much for joining us, Kevin, Jill. A pleasure to have your company on such an austere day, but we have to try and get to the bottom of this. Now, let's join GB News' national reporter, Charlie Peters. Charlie, an incredible amount of information has come out at us in 2 press conferences, one from New Scotland Yard and one there from the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. For the benefit of those tuning in to the show, as we approach 4:15, Charlie Peters, perhaps you can bring our viewers up to speed.
Well, Martin, before I go back to summarising those press conferences and what we've learned from them, I do have some more news for you. We're learning more about the movements of the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, with sources telling GB News that she travelled to Greater Manchester Police headquarters this afternoon to receive an operational briefing and also to meet with and support officers involved. And we understand that she actually had a conversation with the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, who is, of course, Sir Stephen Watson. And she also joined the Cobra meeting taking place right now in the Cabinet Office Briefing Room A in Downing Street. She's joining it from Manchester. We also understand that the Home Secretary has recently met with the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham. Of course, Mr Burnham announced that the offender had been shot and killed before the police gave that indication themselves. So Mr Burnham providing most of the updates and most of the information that we had this morning live to us. And we also understand that the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has also spoken to Jewish leaders, including Mark Levy, the Jewish Leadership Council, and also Mark Gardner, who is the Community Securities Trust Chief Executive. On your screen right now, you're seeing members of the CST from earlier today. That's a Jewish charity that supports the security of the Jewish community right around the United Kingdom. They are in particular busy around synagogues and places of prayer, shuls, during these Jewish high holy days. So Shabana Mahmood, we understand, has set out her support, of course, to the Jewish community, but also engaged directly in Manchester this afternoon with police chiefs. Now, what Sir Stephen Watson told us earlier this afternoon, of course, started with that terrible news that 2 members of the Jewish community had died. They'd been killed, and that 4 remain in hospital, having suffered a variety of serious injuries. And we also heard that the offender was shot and killed by the police within 7 minutes of a call being made to emergency services. Worshippers and security staff were thanked for their immediate bravery in preventing that attacker from entering the synagogue. And we also learned that 2 further people had been arrested, and that's the shot on your screen now on the left side. You can see the police cordon there. 2 people were arrested down that street earlier this afternoon, with GB News witnessing the custody van arriving on that location. And we also heard, obviously, from the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, and, of course, counter-terrorism policing now have the operational and investigative lead on this operation going forward. But we are still expecting more updates from Greater Manchester Police, who told us that the attacker was wearing a vest which had the appearance of an explosive device, which will explain why the police took that decision decision to fire those fatal shots at the attacker after they arrived, and also why they kept their distance so far and attempted to clear people from the scene. Remarkably, so many onlookers, even though there was a man motionless in blood and a person with what appeared to be a suicide explosive vest nearby, people standing around taking footage of the incident. So, yeah, in summary, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, in Manchester this afternoon, joining the Cobra meeting from the capital of the North and engaging directly with Greater Manchester Police as they continue their investigation, now being headed up by counter-terrorism police in the Northwest.
Thank you, Charlie Peters, there for bringing us up to speed and giving us that fresh information. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary in Manchester, with representatives of the Jewish community, and expected to dial into that Cobra meeting taking place, we understand, as we speak, in 10 Downing Street. We saw Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, a short while ago, return to the United Kingdom, of course, in Denmark, in Copenhagen, of all things, about international security. Now, there's a security crisis on British soil. We'll bring you full reaction from that Cobra meeting when the Prime Minister makes a statement. We're anticipating that to happen later in today's show. But for some more immediate reaction on the ground now, let's cross the Crumpsall and speak to GBNews reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, welcome back to the show. More information coming out there. Stephen Watson, the Greater Manchester Police Chief Constable, giving us a huge amount of information. I think a key part was that they know the identity of the deceased, of the suspect, but they've decided not to release that yet because their investigations are not only ongoing, but they're now expanding beyond the Greater Manchester area itself.
Exactly why Greater Manchester Police may not have released the identity of that suspect yet, who they believe they have indeed established. And he said that was due to perhaps safety concerns because that suspect was wearing what could have been a explosive device on his person. So GMP, of course, taking what they feel are the necessary precautions. But just to elaborate a bit further on what we heard from Stephen Watson there, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, he confirmed that, of course, those two people of the Jewish community, that was an update there because we hadn't heard at that point that they were absolutely members of the Jewish faith. So that was an update there that was buried in the statement. But he also added that 4 people remain in hospital. Until that point, it was the understanding of GBNews and the rest of the media that it was 3 people battling for their lives in hospital following the incident this morning. But Stephen Watson confirming in that statement that it's actually 4 people who are in hospital. He also said that updates would be provided as soon as practicable. Of course, that referring to the potential safety risks of revealing the identity, of course, as well, for members of the Jewish faith. Today, the most important day in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. Many members of the faith may not have seen their phones yet. They may not have seen updates about this. So for those members of the faith, it may be that they're not aware yet of loved ones, friends, family who may have been involved, and that could be why GMP are yet to reveal certain details. He, of course, also spoke about his pride in the quick response of the police, but also the bravery of the security and the worshippers at Heaton Park Synagogue who prevented that attacker from entering the synagogue where worshippers had already gathered. And that is, of course, something to be commended, both the fast response times of GMP, who were there on the scene within 7 minutes, but also those who were brave and potentially could have saved multiple lives today.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Thank you very much there, Sophie Reaper, for bringing us up to speed. What's happening on the ground there? Let's get some more analysis. I'm joined in the studio. I'm still got Emily Schrader, still here with Peter Blexley. I'm now joined by my fresh studio guest for some more analysis. That's the former Minister of State for Legal, Migration and the Border, and that's Tom Pursglove, former Conservative MP, of course, as well. Tom, pleasure to have your company, even on this sombre and very dark day. I wanted to ask you, Tom Pursglove, you've been in a lot of these Cobra meetings. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is in Downing Street right now in that Cabinet Office briefing room A. What goes on in these meetings, and what do you anticipate will happen next?
Well, the key thing in a Cobra meeting is to bring together a cast list of ministers in relevant departments where this issue touches upon, to get to the bottom of what has happened, to try and understand the latest as far as is possible, recognising the fact that there's ongoing investigations and that is iterative, and that no doubt the police will learn more as the day goes on. But that will be about trying to bring ministers together, working out as well what further steps government can take to reassure the public, but also are there practical things that different parts of government can do to try and help. So, for example, no doubt the Home Secretary and others will be updating Cabinet colleagues along with officials about, for example, any steps that are being taken to bolster policing around synagogues across the country. That is obviously a really important step from a reassurance point of view, but also to make sure that they are completely on top of these issues moving forward. So there's an information sharing exercise that goes on within Cobra, as well as, often when it's chaired by the Prime Minister, a very direct tasking of actions to make sure that each department is playing its part, particularly on such a tragic day like this. I mean, this is just an appalling incident. Chilling doesn't even begin to describe it, and I think all of us would want to thank the police for everything that they've done in responding to this so rapidly, but also to send our thoughts to the families of the victims.
It also struck me as particularly chilling there, those gentlemen in the yellow baseball caps. I wasn't even aware of this. Maybe I could bring you in here, Emily Schrader. Private security at synagogues, paid for, I'm assuming, by the synagogue, by the Jewish community. They have their own security to man synagogues. I mean, a lot of people will find that really chilling that's even required.
I mean, for as long as I've been alive, this has been the case. One of the first times I was ever in Germany, I remember I was shocked that there was so much security, and I'm used to security being at a synagogue, even from the United States. But what we've seen happen just in the past 10, 15 years across Europe is extremely concerning. And yes, this is a cost that usually comes to the Jewish community, of course. We have seen government support for this, both from the UK, from other governments as well, in terms of bolstering security, as we heard today. That is the right step in terms of the practical issue on the ground right now. But when it comes to actually dealing with this, we need to see leadership that is actually going to stop excusing radicalism, also in speech. As I mentioned before, I think you have to understand that there is a different mentality when it comes to Islamist extremism. And when you hear 24/7 a lot of disinformation, misinformation about what's happening in Gaza, about the war, of course people are going to feel more and more radicalized. And we also see, more concerningly, extremist groups taking advantage of that in order to plot terror attacks, exactly as we saw today. It remains to be seen what the exact cause was of this specific attack, but we can't deny that this is a phenomenon that's been ongoing across Europe, and it hasn't been dealt with adequately. And we need to stop seeing political correctness in response to this. Rather, we need to see a strong response. We need to see accountability. We need to see an end to this, false differentiation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Zionism is the self-determination of the Jewish people in their indigenous homeland, where they are actually from, which is in the land of Israel. It doesn't mean nobody else has a right to self-determination, including Palestinians, but it does mean that the Jews do. And so to be anti-that, to be anti-Zionist, is to be against Jewish and only Jewish self-determination. So of course, this is why you see that the vast majority of the Jewish community considers this as a form of anti-Semitism, and we need to be honest about that and recognize that fact and recognize the threat under the name of anti-Zionism, which really is veiled anti-Semitism.
Could I just also point out one thing that really struck me as incredibly moving when Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, spoke, was those individuals, the private security in baseball caps, presumably they do it on a voluntary basis, I don't know, but they're clearly believers, they probably worship at that synagogue. They were the ones who stepped in. He commended the immediate bravery of security and worshippers, members of the public, members of the Jewish community in Manchester that stepped in, prevented this individual from getting inside the synagogue. His chief directive, after using the vehicle as a weapon and stabbing, was to get inside that building, and they stopped him getting inside the building. And we're told here by the police they believe he had an potential explosive device fitted. And Emily Schrader, I'm just trying to find some light in this incredibly dark day, and to believe that believers would just throw themselves clearly in harm's way to stop somebody getting in a synagogue almost strikes me as a beautiful thing, like a miracle.
This isn't the first time that we've seen incidents like this. You know, I'm based in Tel Aviv. This is where I live and I work, and this is something that tragically we've had to see on the ground from civilians throughout the entire time that I've lived in Israel. In fact, we've seen random civilians attack terrorists and prevent larger scale attacks with umbrellas, with nunchucks, with all kinds of creative resources, because this is the reality, unfortunately, of being a Jew in 2025. And the fact that this is the reality of being a Jew in the UK in 2025 is a national disgrace. It's a regional disgrace and it's a global disgrace. And it breaks my heart that on Yom Kippur of all days, that this is what I'm spending my time doing again. It's truly, truly heartbreaking.
Emily Schrader, thank you very much for being with us today. And please, if you don't mind sticking around, because I need to try and make sense of today, you know, through a lens of somebody who understands the Jewish faith. And I think you're doing that beautifully. Thank you for helping us to try and make some sort of sense. Let's bring on my next guest now, and that's the former prevent manager and the extremism expert, Ghaffar Hussain. Mr. Hussain, welcome to the show. We're trying to make sense of what's going on here, and the details that are coming out are so overwhelming, but also very, very moving. The notion that private security guards and worshippers at a synagogue stepped in to potentially save them from becoming much more macabre and grotesque is mind-blowing.
No, it is, and it's a truly shocking incident. But at the same time, you know, for people those of us who follow these events and follow this work, it's not entirely surprising as well. And I say that because groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, ever since October the 7th, have been openly calling for their followers and supporters all over the world, but specifically in Western countries where there are large and, you know, you might say even vulnerable Jewish communities as vulnerable to attacks like this. In the UK context, obviously London and Manchester, they've been calling for these kind of attacks, sadly, and encouraging their supporters and followers to engage in this kind of activity. So we've seen that in ISIS communications, and we've seen obviously that anti-Semitism has been on the increase as well since October the 7th. I think 2024 was one of the worst years, I think second worst year on record for anti-Semitic hate crime. And again, in the US, there's been huge, I think 70% of anti-religious hate crime in America is anti-Semitism. We've got a huge problem, but obviously that's been exacerbated by global terrorist groups directly encouraging this kind of activity.
I was saying we saw a case yesterday, just yesterday in Berlin. 3 Hamas operatives arrested. They were believed to be on the verge of using Kalashnikovs and other weapons against Jewish targets in Berlin. They were prevented. And, you know, just yesterday, it's so prophetic. You know, we were talking on the show, you know, might we have, and again, I'm not speculating about the motives of today's individual. This is a broader conversation about what could and perhaps is already happening on British soil. We don't know who's really in the country, do we? We could potentially have a problem in Britain similar to that in Berlin.
So is that for me, sorry?
Yeah, that's to you, Ghaffar Hussain. Might we have organised terrorist organisations, you know, walking amongst us in Britain?
Well, that's certainly possible. But I think what we do know is that individuals who are also born and raised in the UK can be inspired by this type of rhetoric and this type of ideology. You know, now with social media platforms and digitization of news content, the Al-Qaeda and ISIS message can reach anyone, anywhere in the world. Regardless of language and regardless of where you are born. I think it's unlikely we'll have trained operatives sent here because it's not necessary to do that if you can inspire people who already live here, already familiar with the geography and the cultures to some extent. So that'd be a much easier option for them to encourage.
But it's not outside the realms of possibility. We've seen people, again, I'm not speculating about this individual, but we have seen instances of people come into this country, for example, from Iran that wish harm against us. It's not outside the realms of possibility to start joining those dots. And that's my point.
Yeah, no. It's certainly possible that individuals from different countries could come into the UK. Obviously, we do need better border security, in my opinion. We do need more due diligence around this work, but also we need to invest more in integration and community cohesion, because, you know, we don't know who was behind the attack, but assume it was someone from Manchester. You know, they're essentially attacking their own fellow citizens, or even in this case, people from the very same city and the very same neighbourhoods that they grew up in. And that's a major issue of concern, that what does that say about our societies and our communities that they can be torn apart and attack each other based on conflicts in different parts of the world? So I think there needs to be a real effort to create greater communication, to invest in meaningful integration. I don't mean not tokenistic events and gestures and tweets. I mean actual activities on the ground that encourage people to engage in British life, British society, understand British values, come together with people from their community who they have something in common with, and create a real meaningful sense of what it means to be from a community. And that's something that's been really lacking in recent years.
Okay, thank you very much there for joining us on the show. That's the former Prevent Manager and extremism expert, Ghaffar Hussain. Thanks for your expertise. Let's get back to the studio. I'm still joined by Emily Schrader, Tom Pursglove and Peter Blexley. Peter, let's bring you in now. And again, we shouldn't be speculating. None of us are speculating about the individual motives of this case. We don't know yet. We need to be patient and wait. And I wanted to specifically ask you, Peter, about the information there that came from Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. He said that the identity of this individual has been established, but they decided not to release that for safety and security reasons. What does he mean by that, and is that the correct thing to do?
OK, it most certainly is. Let me start with that. I understand why people may be going online and saying, we want to know who he is. They're not telling us because there's some greater conspiracy at play here. Well, there isn't. Look at what we know. He was wearing a vest that looks like a bomb. I don't use the term suicide vest. I don't like it. It's a bomb designed to kill people. He was wearing something that looked like a bomb. He's been shot dead partly because of that. Now, if that person has been identified, and if an address for him has been identified, the police will want to take huge care when they search it. Look at the 7/7 bombers all those years ago. When they found an address linked to them and the police went there, it was bubbling away with unstable chemicals that could be explosive. OK? The police are thinking about the public safety and the safety of their officers. What they don't want people doing is finding out this man's identity, going online, establishing an address for him, and then a bunch of TikTokers turn up when it could be premises that could blow everybody off the face of the earth. That's the kind of reason why. So please, the police have got very valid, sensible reasons for not telling us who he is yet.
And I think it's just really important to point that out because, of course, we saw in the immediate aftermath of Southport a huge clamour for additional information became a huge political talking point. And then we saw in the immediate aftermath, I think, actually, it was on my show within, I think, 90 minutes of the Liverpool incident where a vehicle was used to drive into a crowd. The police did decide to release the identity of the individual, particularly his ethnicity. He was a white man, and they said that was to quash speculation. And so a lot of people always say, well, why haven't we found out anything about this individual? There are perfectly legitimate reasons, and we should respect them and be patient and not speculate and get in trouble online.
Yes, but Southport, Liverpool and today, whilst there might be some similarities, in essence, they're very different things.
And that's very, very worth pointing out. Tom Pursglove, I want to bring you back in now, if I could. I want to talk about the political mood music that's been the backdrop to all of this, because we undeniably, and again, I'm not blaming anyone, I'm just talking about the state of the nation, the country we live in now. In the immediate aftermath of October the 7th, in 5 days' time, it'll be the second anniversary of that, we saw thousands of pro-Palestine protesters take to the streets. Many people believed the policing was standoffish. I know it was. I've been on those protests. I went to the protest at Parliament Square where they projected from the river to the sea onto Big Ben. I was begging a police officer to kick that projector over. I said to him, turn that thing off. This is bringing shame on our nation. Wasn't interested. I got egged. I got stuff thrown at me, I got fluids thrown at me. This isn't about me. The point I'm trying to make is this. We have the mood music in the nation where the protests have been tolerated. And I want to talk to you about a tale of two Home Secretaries. Suella Braverman called those marches hate marches. She was vilified for that. She said they should be banned. She was absolutely lambasted by the establishment, by the media, by the political left. And we have Shabana Mahmood this week who talks about the rise of racism in Britain, she talks, of course, about the far right. She talks, of course, about Nigel Farage. She talks about how she felt the strain of being a British Muslim post 7/7 and post 9/11. She never once mentioned anti-Semitism, and I was struck by that at the time and mentioned it in the studio. Does this particular government have a blind spot to anti-Semitism?
So you and I talked only a couple of days ago about the temperature of our political debate in this country, and in a different sense in terms of risks of violence towards politicians. But in a related way, it is exactly these sorts of incidents that I think bring this home, just how serious this is. And I personally don't think that it's sustainable to continue to have this febrile atmosphere in our country. I personally can't think of a time in my life where anti-Semitism has been so rife. I think that it has become commonplace in society. I think that there is a massive duty on all of us in public life to call it out.
Could I go further? Is it almost fashionable? Is it almost fashionable with the intelligentsia, with the liberal elite, with the university, on campus? It's also, I hate to say this, it's almost trendy to be anti-Semitic. Can I speak to you about that, Emily Schrader? You're on the end there. You're nodding away. Has it almost become the acceptable pseudo-intellectual form of racism?
Of course, of course. I mean, I think we've seen over the last few years a concerted effort by the far left to push Jews out of minority spaces, and this is the result. And we saw just, yesterday, we saw the flotilla that, Greta Thunberg was on, of course, and this has become sort of a fashionable cause. You see the videos they're releasing of them dancing and singing on this boat with 350 kilograms of humanitarian aid, which is nothing, aid that was offered multiple times by multiple countries to ensure that it gets into the hands of Gazans, but they're not interested in that. They're interested in selfies, they're interested in social media, they're interested in TikTok videos, they're interested in what's trendy. And it's extremely concerning that we've seen this collusion become stronger than perhaps ever, with the exception of the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, of the alliance between a Marxist ideology and an Islamist ideology. And anytime you see those two come together, it's a very, very dangerous place to be, because these are totalitarian ideologies. I'm not talking about general left-wing ideology. I'm talking about extremist ideology that believes, as I started our time here today saying, that believes they're entitled to violence in order to pursue their political ideology. And that is the root of the problem.
Tom. And I think probably the most graphic illustration that I can think of the appalling state of this is what happened at Glastonbury. Because the country that I know, the Britain that I know, doesn't put up with this. And the fact that you'd got that individual on the stage, who I won't even name because I just think the behaviour was so contemptuous, to then have people waving flags and chanting and almost going along with that, turning a blind eye to it, I just thought was chilling. And that's not who we are as a country. So all of us have to call that out.
I wonder if you're wrong there. I wonder actually if we are becoming that way as a country.
May I add, please, once upon a time, I held the BBC in some regard because I thought it employed people that would have pulled the plug on that kind of thing. The minute it started, we've slid as a nation a long, long way downwards.
It was a disgrace. And what has to happen is that the government has to properly fund and support initiatives that keep the Jewish community safe. There is a responsibility to call this out. I often think that politicians, when they speak about these issues in some quarters, do so in a qualified way. Actually, the condemnation of this behaviour has to be complete, it has to be absolute. There is no place for it. And I just think that as a society, until we grip this, we're going to continue to see these sorts of incidents.
Tom, we've gone way beyond the realms of lip service now. I mean, come on. The Cobra meeting can come out today, and there can be a solemn and a sombre statement from the Prime Minister, from the Home Secretary, from anybody in British senior politics. But the reality is, we are where we are, and we've got where we are, I think, because of a long and shameful silence.
I think, as you touch on many times on your programmes, there are certain issues that are inflaming tensions where common sense requires solutions to be taken. When you consider the illegal migration picture, there is undoubtedly security angles to that, but there's also just that sense of unfairness. You can never, integrate properly into our society the number of people who are coming here presently, whether that be illegal migration or legal migration, it is not a sustainable situation. So you've got to deal with those issues, but you've also got to have a zero tolerance approach. When people are inciting violence, they should feel the full force of the law. There is no excuse, and we cannot continue to have this horrible tolerance of that behaviour.
Okay, thank you very much. I need to bring in my next guest now, who's been patiently waiting, and that's the Israeli author and the co-founder of the Tel Aviv Institute, Hen Mazig. Hen, welcome to the show, and thank you for patiently waiting. May I first get your thoughts on what has been a dark and, I believe, deeply shameful day in British history?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and for the moral clarity, which is very absent in British media today. I mean, Manchester was always coming. For years, Jew hatred has been allowed to roam the streets of Britain without any checks, and crowds chanting for the Intifada, calling Jews genocidal, colonizers, demanding Israel's destruction, and the authorities really did nothing. I just posted on my X account a video from October 8th, 2023, where a man in Manchester is saying that the fight in Palestine is much harder than the one in elsewhere, and that people around the world need to take actions against the Jews. So I think that this has been coming for a long time. And of course, you can advocate for the end of the war. It's something that I've done. Many Jews support the ending the war in Israel. But I think what has happened is that we are seeing what we've been warning everyone about, that this is going to turn into violence against us. And it has for 2 years. And now it's just so deadly that people are paying attention. But, you know, when I hear that the government's answer is that we need more security at synagogues, it's just ridiculous. It's not the solution. We don't need more security. It's more security in synagogue is an admission of failure. That's what it is. And Jews don't need to have armed guards to prayer, just like Christians don't need armed guards to prayer, and Muslims don't need armed guard to prayer. But the fact that this is the reality is saying that the government has really failed the Jewish community and failed to listen to us and to call out this hatred and to separate it from a just movement for peace, which I support, and say this is not what you do. By spilling Jewish blood in the UK, you're not helping to feed any Palestinian child.
You know, Han Mazig, Emily Schrader is nodding along here, and I just can't believe that we're in a situation where you need to be protected by armed police officers to pray. I sincerely can't believe it. And the answer to send in more security, surely, is treating the symptom. It's not addressing the cause.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And when I'm thinking about other incidents, I mean, I can't remember in recent years a pride parade being targeted this way, with gay people being murdered at a pride parade. I don't remember in recent years, at least, any mosque being targeted on Ramadan with Muslim prayers being targeted this way. How come it's the Jewish community? And you know, there's something so evil and so vicious by this calculus attack on Jewish holidays. We've seen it on October 7th in Israel, which was a Jewish holiday, and we're seeing it today on the holiest day for Jews, when the attacker knew that Jews would come to synagogue on this day to practice and to worship and to pray, and he knew that we are fasting, so we'd be more vulnerable. And to do this, I mean, the levels of wickedness and evil that it takes to do something like this in the UK today is just beyond my comprehending. And any person any decent person seeing it, I'm sure, would feel the same way. You know, it just sends a message to Jews in this country and around the world that we're not safe. And I think a lot of us were worried that we're not safe. And today it was confirmed to us. And if my Jewish friends here in the UK are telling me today that they are considering leaving this country to Israel, a country that is at war with millions around us calling to kill us, and we are being bombed, and we are facing a hostage crisis still for 2 years, still being held in Gaza, and yet British Jews feel safer there than they feel in this country. I think it should be a wake-up call for every decent British person today.
Hen Mazig, so moving what you're saying. Can I ask you specifically what you think would be the right thing for the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, to say when he comes out of this emergency Cobra meeting that's happening as we speak? And of course, we'll carry that full statement when it happens in today's show, because after the Southport incidents, for example, £117 million of public money was found to protect UK mosques and Muslim schools from hate attacks. But we haven't seen a similar response. In fact, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak previously announced a package for the Jewish community, a mere 70 million over the next 4 years. I mean, money is one thing. Then money could offer, again, protection, it could offer security, but is that enough? Is that what you want to see? More money, more direct support?
No, absolutely not. We don't want more fences. We don't want more guards. We don't want to be afraid to go to our synagogues or to our places of worship. No one should experience it. We want the same thing that every other minority community in Britain expects, to walk into our houses of prayer without fear. And that won't come from security cameras. It will come from leadership, from law enforcement, and a government that is willing to confront the hate head on and not play with it, as we've seen in the last 2 years from the Labour Party and Labour politicians been towing the line of just, it's not even, ignoring anti-Semitism. We've seen a lot of them justifying it and saying the situation in Gaza is far worse. I mean, can you imagine that being said about any other group of people? There's only one Jewish state in the world. Half of the world Jewry lives there. Millions of Jews around the world are also Zionists and support this country. And our existence as Jews should not be a death sentence. And that's something that the British government, I'm not a politician, none of us are, but there's a government that has been elected by the people, and the bare minimum that they can provide for the Jewish community in this country is safety and security, and it doesn't come from more weapon and more guards. It comes from leadership, and it comes from saying this is not okay. And they've done it in the Jeremy Corbyn era, and they knew how to handle it. But since then, something has changed, and something is broken, and it has to be addressed.
Such powerful sentiment, and thank you for just helping me, helping the nation to try and make sense of this senseless act and this spiral towards something we have to take back control of. That's the Israeli author and the co-founder of the Tel Aviv Institute, Hen Mazig. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Now, let's just remind ourselves of what the head of the counter-terror police said to us earlier on today.
This morning, an appalling attack took place in Grumpsall in Manchester. 2 people have died. The attacker has been shot dead by the police. We believe we know their identity, but for safety reasons at the scene, we're unable to confirm at this stage. 3 other members of the public are in a serious condition. We have also made 2 further arrests. And based on what we know, counter-terrorism policing has declared this as a terrorist incident.
And that was a statement earlier on this afternoon. That was Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard. I want to get back to the studio now and speak with Emily Schrader, who's been with me throughout the entire show today. I'm so grateful for your company today. Emily Schrader, try and make sense of this on Yom Kippur. I know this is a difficult thing for you to do. Thank you so much for donating so much of your time and intellect and expertise to try and help us make sense of this. With my previous guest there, I was saying, is money the answer? Is security the answer? And you agree that it's not. And instead, what do you think we should do?
I mean, absolutely, it's not the answer. Of course, we do need to be responsible in terms of security in the immediate aftermath, as I mentioned before. But I think that the larger problem here in the UK and elsewhere is education. I mean, when you have a large population coming from a vastly different culture with vastly different value system, where many of them are taught that it is okay to harm other people who are different than you, to persecute other minorities, specifically the Jewish communities. The level of conspiracies that we see from the Islamic world are extremely concerning. And unfortunately, that needs to be acknowledged by the government, and it needs to be dealt with through a de-radicalization effort that needs to happen here in the UK from, elementary school and beyond. We cannot accept people who think it's okay to walk into a synagogue and kill Jews. It's outrageous. And that's what the resources need to be poured into. Education. And I'm sorry, but if the United Arab Emirates, if Bahrain, if Morocco, if these countries can do de-radicalization consolidation in their governments and form peace with Israel, with the state of Israel, then the UK can do it too. And they're falling behind when it comes to this issue. And that's the only long-term solution when it comes to dealing with this issue.
Joe, I think you're right, because, again, we've covered on the show in the past about how few British school children are sometimes even aware of the Holocaust as a thing.
Well, even further than that, just on social media and the initial response to the attacks today, the first comments I saw from British Islamic commentators was praising it or excusing it, or even in many cases blaming the Jewish community. Well, if they hadn't supported Israel, this wouldn't have happened. It's outrageous. It's outrageous, and it should never be tolerated. This type of thinking needs to be condemned and dealt with through a de-radicalization campaign.
Administrator, thank you very, very much once again. Let's get my next guest in now. That's the organiser of the Yellow Ribbon campaign, and it's Heidi Bakram. Heidi, welcome to the show. A huge amount's been going on today. Can I get your initial top-line thoughts on what has been, I believe, a deeply dark and shameful day in British history?
I think it's been a really shocking day today for the Jewish community, and on Yom Kippur as well, which is the holiest day of the year. A lot of Jewish people will be fasting or attending services and off their devices as well. So many may be quite disconnected from what's happening and what the news has been. So what we're seeing, what I'm hearing from my friends and family is a lot of grief and shock and horror and actually anger as well, because it is something that we've been expecting in a way, because we've seen the anti-Semitism ramping up in the past 2 years. Anti-Semitism's gone through the roof, and those have often been expressed as violent hate too. And what we've seen on the other side of that is a lack of action from the authorities. So the double whammy of the hate increasing and then very little response from those who are supposed to protect the community is what's led to this moment, I believe.
And Heidi Bakram, the Prime Minister is currently in an emergency Cobra meeting. He's expected to address the nation later on. With some irony, he was pulled back from a security conference in Copenhagen to face a security crisis on British soil. What can the Prime Minister say to you that will make you feel reassured and safer today as a Jewish person?
I'm not Jewish myself, but my husband's Jewish, and he had to rush to synagogue today to do extra layers of security. And actually, while there, a van drove past and shouted baby killers at the Jewish people at the synagogue. So, there's nothing that people can say to the community. It's what they actually are going to do about it. And what we've seen in the past has been a lot of inaction and a lot of failed action. So we've seen actual failure of court cases very recently of terror supporters who the system let off. So we don't need more words. We need action to fix those problems.
Can I ask you about the mood on British streets since, that event 2 years ago? Well, in 5 years' time, it'll be the second anniversary, of course, of the Hamas terrorist invasion of Israel. I was astonished at the time, right from when we first covered it on GBNews, the very next weekend, those protests broke out. And a lot of people looking at that thought the police were standoffish. Suella Braverman at the time, the Home Secretary, said that these are hate marches, they should be banned. She was chastised for that. They were allowed to go on in a way that many people believe the police weren't taking it seriously. Do you think that kind of allowing this to fester has been part of the problem?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's gone further than that. On the night of October 7th in London, we saw videos of people celebrating the massacre. In Brighton, where I live, the next day, in the centre of town, there was a woman on a megaphone saying how it was a day of inspiration. So, and that happened actually in Manchester too, the very next day. So the seeds of this kind of violent anti-Semitism have been planted a long time ago. And what we've seen since has been very little pushback against it. And even with the past government as well, I mean, Suella Braverman did say those things and did try to act, but there's all sorts of blocks to actual action on these things. And we have seen a little bit more action against the marchers congregating near synagogues in London, and they're perhaps going through areas in Westcliff, but we haven't seen that strong enough or quick enough at all. So there is really very much a sense that the streets belong to them and they can pretty much get away with anything. I mean, even last night, I saw videos of them setting off fireworks in central London. They walked from Downing Street to Piccadilly Circus, and really nothing was done. I didn't see a single police officer around them. And even if they were there, I'm not entirely sure they would have challenged them anyway. So they're getting away with a lot. And the thing is each step that gets taken and doesn't get punished means that another step gets taken. And what we want is for the hate to be stopped before it comes to the door of synagogues.
Heidi Backram, before I let you go, I think one of the most moving things of what's been a very, very moving day for all of us was the press conference that was given by the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police. That was Stephen Watson, around about an hour ago. And he told us something which I just found profoundly moving, and that was the immediate bravery of the private security at that synagogue and the Jewish worshippers themselves are what prevented what could have been a far greater tragedy. This individual, we're being told by the authorities, was believed to have a bomb about his person, a suicide belt, call it what you want, incendiary device to try and kill and maim, that's what it is. And it was only those worshippers and the private security guards that prevented him from getting inside. And I just want to try and find some tiny, tiny crumb of comfort and ray of hope on a day like today, the astonishing bravery of those individuals to stop this catastrophe being even worse almost feels like a miracle.
Absolutely. And those volunteers and the community itself and those paid security, they do that day in, day out. They protect the Jewish community from these kinds of threats. And that is the sort of everyday heroism that goes on in the community. And a lot of those people are not Jewish as well. And the Community Security Trust that takes care of the community are absolutely incredible organisation. And if they weren't there, much worse things would happen, for sure.
Thank you for your thoughts on this day. That's the organiser of the Yellow Ribbon campaign, Heidi Backram. Thank you very, very much indeed. As we approach 5 o'clock on a dark day, I believe, in British history, I want to give the final words of this hour to Emily Schrader, who's been with me for the past 2 hours. Emily, thank you so much for being here. I know you're only in the country for a few days. I've been desperate to get you on the show for such a long time, and here we are under such, dark circumstances. But thank you for joining us. As you depart the studio, what are your parting thoughts? I know you noticed there you look very gravely saddened and yet not at all surprised when Heidi Backram said that somebody'd shouted baby killers from a van as they passed.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned just a few days ago while I was here in the UK, I myself, someone just overheard a conversation I was having with friends. I heard the word Israel and felt entitled and emboldened enough to interrupt our conversation to demand an answer as to whether or not we were Israeli. This is not normal behavior. It shouldn't be tolerated. And, I don't want to focus on the negative because I've talked a lot about that. I actually want to circle back as I close to something that Heidi said, which is that these people who are working for the CST, many of which are volunteers, are true heroes. And they embody, I think, what it really means to be a Jew today. I spoke about the concerns and the risks of being a Jew in 2025 in Europe and beyond. But there is also a silver lining to this, and that is that we are not in 1930. And we will not back down the same way that we saw happen before in the Holocaust. And we are not going to go quietly, and we are not going to be silent in response to acts of terrorism like this. And this is something that we will continue to unite and work with our partners from the Christian community, even from the Muslim community, to combat against. This is something that we will not accept, and we will not go quietly. And that is the whole ethos of the CST and of Zionism, quite frankly, that we can't depend on anyone but ourselves to defend ourselves. And unfortunately, while we have support, and there should be more support, it's true. It's true, and it was proven true again today. And that is exactly why, quite frankly, the state of Israel is so important today. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. And we need to continue to be honest about that and to push back against extremism whenever and wherever it arises.
Emily Schrader, thank you so much for being here with us today on GB News. It's been an absolute pleasure to have your company on a terrible, terrible day. But you've really can I just
thank you,
darling. Thank you so much. Thank you. We'll let you go on your way now. Look, it's 5 p.m. here on the Martin Daubney Show. Let's have a little recap on what we've seen so far today, and just a warning, you may find some of this content distressing.
They've killed him. Hell, Lucas.
Everybody else, get back! If you're not involved, move back! Get away! Somebody stay with casualties! Everybody else, he has a bomb! Go away!
He's got a bomb on him! He's got a bomb! Mate, he's got a... Man, he's got a bomb on his jacket, mate! He's trying to go in a...
Now. Based on what we know, counter-terrorism policing has declared this as a terrorist incident.
The attack in Manchester this morning is absolutely shocking, and all of our thoughts are with those affected.
We can confirm that 2 members of our Jewish community have sadly died as a result of this attack.
Today it's a day of prayer, so when we pray with a long white robe, and I saw at the bottom of his robe there was blood on it. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that he'll sort out more armed police for Synagogue. And I'm saying straight out to him, straight out, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, we don't need more armed police. What we need is projects of dialogue, of people understanding each other's faiths.
So welcome to the show. Quick update for those joining us on the show. A dark day in British history indeed. Confirmation of 2 dead at the Heaton Park Synagogue. 2 believed to be members of the Jewish community there. The suspect was also shot dead within 7 minutes of the incident. He drove a vehicle at high speed into the worshippers. He then got out of that vehicle and began stabbing people with a knife. The police have announced at 2 press conferences today, first at Scotland Yard, the second in Greater Manchester. They believe he was wearing a suicide belt and what appeared to be a stab or a bulletproof vest. He was then repeatedly told to lie on the ground. When he didn't comply, an armed response officer shot him dead. A video of the incident, we could hear a local saying, "Get back, he's got a bomb, he's going to press the trigger." This, of course, is on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Lawrence Taylor, the head of counter-terrorism at New Scotland Yard, gave a press conference earlier in today, around about 3 p.m. We learned from that, we believe we know the identity, but for safety reasons, we cannot confirm that. There were 2 other arrests in the area. Stephen Watson, who's the Greater Manchester Chief Constable, then reconfirmed at the press conference around about an hour later that this has officially been declared a terrorist incident and the identity of the individual has been established, but again, repeating, that's not being released because there are other investigations going on at 2 or more other properties, we understand. He then, Stephen Watson, commended, I think, one of the most incredible parts of this, the immediate bravery and the security of worshippers at the synagogue 3 miles north of Manchester, meant that the suspect, the perpetrator, did not manage to get inside. You can only imagine what may have happened if he was wearing an explosive device, and he did get inside. At present, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is inside a Cobra meeting in 10 Downing Street, Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. Prime Minister was emergency recalled to the UK. With a sense of irony, perhaps, he was in Copenhagen at an international security summit, been brought back to British soil to face a security crisis on our own soil. We've heard from police that additional security will be now deployed to synagogues across Britain, and that in itself is a damning indictment, is it not, of where we are? That on this day, 5 days away from the second anniversary of October the 7th, we have a confirmed terrorist attack on British soil, and the motives of which we are still awaiting, and we're trying to make sense of it in real time here for you on GB News with the very best experts and analysts from around the world. And I'm now joined in the studio by the Reform MP for Ashfield, Lee Anderson. Lee Anderson, welcome to the show. You're initially due to come in to talk about the toxic political environment in Britain that's broken out in terms of racism and divide between the Labour Party and Reform UK. That seems a mere piffling issue now compared to what's happened today in Greater Manchester. Can I get your initial reaction to this deeply shameful day in British history?
Yeah, it is shameful, Martin. It's not just the political world that's divided at the moment. I think it's our whole social fabric at the moment is in tatters. I mean, our poor Jewish friends, again, having to suffer the brunt of these horrific attacks. And he previously has talked about Israel, and it's not just Israel that gets this almost constantly. I've been there and I've seen what they have to live through on a daily basis. It's almost expected. They're always waiting for some sort of attack, but it's not just in Israel. It's all around the world where we have pockets of the Jewish population who are just trying to, go by their daily business and live a peaceful life and contribute towards our society. And we saw it, Martin. You saw it a couple of years back on Whitehall. You was there with your camera phone filming some of these chants. They were shining the graphics from the river to the sea. And this was almost just ignored by the authorities, ignored by the police. At the time, Mayor Khan never spoke out about it. So we've created an environment in this country where it's OK to hate a particular religion or a particular section of society. This comes as no surprise, but I will say this: how brave are them people today at that centre, those security staff, to just step in. When quite obviously, I've seen the pictures of this chap. He's got things strapped around his middle. It looks like he's got bombs strapped to him, but people just waded in and got it sorted. So yeah, a fair play to them, but massive commiserations to the families affected.
And there's images just being released on Reuters of the deceased face down outside the synagogue, surrounded by plant pots that have all been knocked aside in the scuffle, and an incredible sight of a bomb disposal robot near him, and a heavily armoured police officer inspecting the corpse. That individual shot dead 7 minutes after this attack, first using a vehicle, then a knife. I'm also joined in the studio by Chris Hope, our political editor. Chris, you've come straight in from Downing Street, of course. Keir Starmer has been called back from Copenhagen, meant to be there at a summit of world leaders to talk about international security issues. Here we are, he's been dragged back to Britain because we have a domestic security crisis on our hands, and not just about what happened at the synagogue today, but potentially all across synagogues across Britain. It's an astonishing situation, Chris, that on Yom Kippur they are deploying armed police officers around the nation.
That's right. So we think the Cobra meeting has been going on for about an hour in Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. We think Steve Reed's there. He's the local government, the Communities Secretary with the PM, the National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, the Assistant Police Commissioner, Lawrence Taylor, you saw earlier at 3 o'clock giving a statement. We also think the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, may have joined that remotely from Manchester. We're hoping to hear from the Prime Minister within the next hour or so. What I think is required from him is simply reassurance for the Jewish community, because you can deploy police assets, in his words, from the tarmac of Copenhagen Airport to synagogues around the country, but Jewish communities want to hear they're safe. They look at last week, this government recognising the state of Palestine. They know the issue with Israel. Of course, Israel is different to the Jewish community here, but that is concerning, that the people will be thinking, have you got our backs too, Prime Minister? That's what they want to hear from the Prime Minister. We'll wait and see what happens next. I was in number 10 when he arrived back straight from this EPC, European Political Community meeting, was due to be discussing illegal migration. It won't now. Cobra had measures overnight announced by the Prime Minister. They're about to tweak elements of the European Convention on Human Rights, remove ways to frustrate attempts to deport. But yet again, you know, a real concern here. We don't know who this attacker, the killer is. He is now dead. But huge questions about security and the safety of our Jewish communities.
And we had a picture on our screens there a short while ago. Maybe we can get that back up. That's a photograph, a confirmed photograph of the deceased. You can see him wearing that vest and brandishing that knife outside the synagogue there out in Greater Manchester. Lee Anderson, I want to bring you, that's the picture you can see on your screen there now. Again, the police aren't naming this individual yet. They've confirmed they do know who it is. There are other investigations still going on. We believe at a couple of other properties and perhaps a third one in the area. And Peter Blexy was in earlier on explaining to us from a policing point of view, Lee Anderson, why it's the sensible and the correct thing to not release this individual's details yet. We don't know the motives yet. We can speculate. We probably shouldn't. But the fact of the matter is, I want to get back to the notion of the Prime Minister is going to come out of that meeting, Lee Anderson, in a short while's time, and attempt to reassure the Jewish people of Britain that they're safe in Britain. I wonder, Lee, if that ship has sailed. I've had Jewish guests on for the entire show who they feel profoundly unsafe in Britain. I think somewhere along the line we've gone desperately wrong.
Yeah, I spoke to lots of Jewish people in London, made some Jewish friends since I became a member of Parliament, and even 5 or 6 years ago when I first got to this place, Jewish members of the Jewish community were saying to me they felt unsafe. And like I said, Martin, earlier, over the past couple of years when we've seen the demos, we've seen what's been happening in and around London, and there's been no accountability for certain people who's been out demonstrating, chanting horrific chants and, you know, shining the slogans onto the Elizabeth Tower. Our Jewish friends feel unsafe in the community. And it's time now. The Prime Minister, you know, just a few weeks back, he's recognised the state of Palestine. He should now recognise the fact that our Jewish friends in our communities around the UK are feeling very unsafe and scared, and some are thinking about leaving the country. What have we come to?
Lee Anderson, just before I let you go, there's been a lot of talk these past 2 years of two-tier policing around these protests. Do you think that's true? And do you think the standoffish nature of the police, some perceived, towards the pro-Palestine protests has inevitably driven us towards a situation where today was more likely?
Of course it has, Martin. You know, I was in hot water 18 months ago over some accusations I made about the mayor of London, about the Islamists and about what's happening on our streets and on all these demonstrations. I got into hot water. Unfortunately, you know, I think certain sections of society have got control of our streets sometimes and control the narrative, and they're going to commit awful crimes. And I know we shouldn't speculate about the identity, but I think, you know, deep down inside of us, most people watching this now on GBNews will have their suspicions.
Yeah, and we hasten to add, we don't know the motives yet. The police will release that at some point down the line when their inquiries have gone a bit further. Lee Anderson, thanks for joining us on the show. Come back to you in a minute, Chris Hope, because I've got some immediate reaction now from the Liberal Democrats leader, Sir Ed Davey. He had this to say.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the families of the victims and to all the Jewish community in our country. Frankly, this terrorist outrage is an attack on all of us, and we should stand in solidarity with our Jewish friends and make it clear that all violence is unacceptable. Anti-Semitism is outrageous. I think everyone will be shocked by this terrorist violence on the streets of Manchester, and we want to send our thoughts and prayers to the families of the victims and to the whole Jewish community on this holiest of holy days for our Jewish community. There's no doubt that the threat to our Jewish community from people committing these terrorist acts and through anti-Semitic acts has got worse and worse, and we need to stand with them. The government needs to do everything it can to protect our Jewish community and our synagogues. I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has come back early from his foreign trip and has called a Cobra meeting to focus the whole of government to support the police, the anti-terrorist unit, to do all they can both to catch the suspects and anyone else involved in this, but also to make sure that the Jewish community in Manchester and across our country has every support they can.
Response there from the Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey. And let's go live now to Crumpsall in Greater Manchester and speak to GBNews reporter Sophie Reaper, who's been reporting from the scene of the crime throughout the day. Sophie, welcome back to the show. We can see there the police line. They're moving you on as we speak. What's the latest on the ground there?
Well, Martin, I can still speak to you, although you will notice, of course, that there is a heavy media presence here in Crumpsall. Everyone has gathered to cover the shocking and horrific terrorist incident that took place here this morning, and police have just told us that they are now moving several emergency vehicles away from the scene, several unmarked vehicles and 2 fire engines we can see. But let's just, whilst we have this moment, let's just review what we know happened here today. At 9:31, the police were called by a member of the public with reports of that terrorist incident. By 9:37, a major incident had been declared by Greater Manchester Police, and by 9:38, the suspect in this incident had been shot by armed officers from Greater Manchester Police. That is how quickly things developed here this morning, Martin. And just to emphasise the speed of what happened here, now we can just see the police line being put back in place. If you can see, there's another flurry of movement here, Martin. Perhaps we can return to the position that we were stood in, although actually perhaps not. I think the BBC are staying where they are, so we'll make it work, Martin. We heard from Stephen Watson, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, in the last hour, and he spoke of the bravery of those worshippers and the security who were outside and inside the synagogue here at Heaton Park this morning, who he said they potentially have saved many lives this morning by preventing that attacker from getting into the synagogue. I'm just going to move slightly, Martin, as well, just to create some room. Now, this is something that will resonate not only through this community here in Crumpsall, not only here in Greater Manchester and the North West, or even just in the UK. This is something we've seen reporters here today from all over the globe, from France, from Australia, from Germany, people from all over the world here to report on the events of this morning, and that is because they are so harrowing, they are so shocking. And we had the chance earlier to speak to some of the residents from this community about how shocked they are about the events of this morning, and this is what they had to say.
Okay, fine, all right. Very nervous at the moment, and they feel very vulnerable, as we do, especially as the Jewish schools, the synagogues. It's a big Jewish community here.
And I don't understand why, because we just want to live and let live.
Been unfortunately many times in war zone countries, so unfortunately I do know the sound of shots. So when I heard that, I said, that sounds like shots. And then a couple of minutes later I heard multiple sirens and then helicopters, etc. I realised something was going on. Police wouldn't even allow us out of our flats. And later on, police came and evacuated us from our flat. As I was walking down the road, I did see the rabbi of the synagogue, Rabbi Walker, and now it's a day of prayer. So when we pray with a long white robe, and I saw at the bottom of his robe there was blood on it. Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that he'll sort out more armed police for a synagogue. And I'm saying straight out to him, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, we don't need more armed police. What we need is projects of dialogue, of people understanding each other's faiths from different areas, from different aspects.
Together, don't you?
Well, Martin, in the distance now that those fire engines have moved on, we can see, or we could a moment ago, a person in full white, and we believe they may be a member of the crime scene investigation team. They were just taking pictures. Perhaps in the distance you can see something orange lying in the road, and they were just taking photographs of that. You can see where that tripod is, where they were just taking photographs. In fact, they're just coming back into the shot now. I think you'll be able to see them, yes, in their surgical scrubs, obviously in order to preserve the crime scene itself. They're taking photographs. Of course, we heard from GMP earlier that this is a live and ongoing investigation. 2 further arrests have been made at that address about a quarter of a mile away. And of course, over the coming days, GMP also confirming they believe they know the identity of the attacker this morning. They're not yet revealing that due to what they say are safety concerns. But I think in the coming hours and days, that will be the next answers to those questions that the members of the public will be looking for. The identity of the attacker and who those 2 other people who were arrested for. Was he acting alone or did he have help? Those are the questions I think many of our viewers will be having, and I think over the coming days, those are the questions they'll be getting the answers to.
So, Reba, thank you for that live update from the scene of the incident there in Crumpsall in Manchester. Thank you very much indeed. Back to the studio. I'm still here with Chris Hope and Lee Anderson. Chris Hope, there's breaking news on the Cobra meeting. Tell us more.
We think it's breaking up now, so we should be hearing from the Prime Minister shortly. In the past few moments, the Israeli Foreign Minister said he's appalled by the attack in Manchester. So Gideon Saar says this. He stands with the wonderful people of Britain, which is currently suffering from a horrific wave of anti-Semitism, as Lee Anderson was saying to you, Martin. The truth must be told. Blatant and rampant anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli incitement, as well as the calls for support for terror, have recently become a widespread phenomenon in the streets of London, in cities across the UK and on campuses. The authorities in Britain have failed to take out the necessary action to curb this toxic wave of anti-Semitism. They expect more words from the Starmer government. That, I think, is what Israel is demanding today, and also the Jewish community.
So the Cobra meeting has broken up. We're expecting, I think, Chris Hope there. There's earlier pictures there of the Prime Minister making an emergency detour back to the United Kingdom from Copenhagen. He was there, of course, on an international security summit, coming back to a security crisis on British soil. We're expecting, I think, a statement from the Prime Minister in around about 10 minutes' time. Lee Anderson, ahead of that, I want to talk about the political environment. I spoke with you privately after the Labour Party conference, but we haven't had a chance to talk on air about your reactions, because, of course, there was a lot of talk about the racism of the far right. There was a lot of talk about the racism of Nigel Farage and Reform UK. There was Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, spoke about how she understood the suffering of British Muslims post 9/11 and post 7/7, but not a word about anti-Semitism.
Well, this is a thing we spoke about, Martin, just a few days ago. I listened to the Home Secretary's speech while I was driving my car, and the one thing that struck me, she was very quick to talk about racism, talk about the rise of the far right, talk about reform, talk about Nigel, as was other cabinet ministers, and the threat to Muslims in this country. And we know there is a threat, I accept that. But what she failed to do was mention our Jewish community once. I don't think any of the cabinet ministers mentioned our Jewish community throughout the whole conference, throughout the whole 3 days. I mean, how much... If you just imagine, Martin, you're one of the Jewish community living in this country right now, how must you feel listening to that Labour conference when nobody stuck up for you? Now we see this, and, there's no wonder they're thinking about leaving the country, some of our Jewish friends. There's no wonder they're scared. There's no wonder that they feel like nobody's listening to them. And Keir Starmer's got to come out in the next 10 minutes or so and really lay the law down and offer, say to the Jewish community, you are safe in British hands, because at the moment they don't feel that way. And a lot of it is down to these useless politicians. We've got a mayor in London that sees things happening on our streets and does absolutely nothing. And quite frankly, some of these politicians in this place and over there should be disgusted.
We saw Ed Davey a short while ago. You watched his statement here on GB News. And how many people are going to listen to that phrase anymore? Thoughts and prayers.
Mate,
before they just think, how many more times can we say thoughts and prayers, light candles and sing Kumbaya, or before we realise that's just not the right response?
Yeah, we don't want people lighting candles and singing songs and saying we're sorry and all this. We want action. You was there, Martin. I keep harping on about it on Parliament Square a couple of years back when there was, up to all this mischief, the pro-Palestine mob. And what did the police do? What did the mayor do? What did the Labour Party do? What did the government do? The Tory government at the time did absolutely nothing. They've got free rein. They feel emboldened. With the rise of Corbyn and his party now, who knows where this may end, mate? We need to nip this in the bud right now and clamp down hard on these lunatics.
Thank you for joining us, Lee Anderson in the studio. Chris Hope, we're expecting the statement from the Prime Minister to be relatively imminent in the next 6 or 7 minutes or so, we understand. Is there anything you can truly say? You know, I've had members of the Jewish community from all around the world on the show these past 2.5 hours, and they're all at the point where they're saying, you know, words are just not enough anymore. And in particular, if the response is about additional security, they're vociferously saying that's treating the problem, not the cause. It's treating the symptom.
So it's a language issue, I think, for our people in authority. We're looking here at Nick Timothy, former advisor to Theresa May in Number 10 and at the Home Office for many years. He says this, that we should thank Britain's Jews and tell them they must always know this is their home and stop telling ourselves and reassuring that real lies about the threat of extremism and violence in Britain. So reassure the Jewish community, this is your home, we will look after you. You can be critical of Israel's behaviour in Gaza, but look after our Jews here. That is what's so important.
OK, Chris, so we need to go straight back now to Crumpsall and speak to GBNews reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, I believe you've got a breaking news line for us.
We have indeed, Martin. In the last few seconds, we've received word from Greater Manchester Police in which they've confirmed that the device the suspect was wearing this morning was not viable, meaning that there was no explosive device, there was no threat of any kind of bomb. Of course, we saw this morning that van arriving with bomb disposed on it. We heard bangs this morning and there were questions as to whether that device he was wearing, people reporting that he may have been wearing a vest with wires. But we now know from Greater Manchester Police that the device was not viable. They say we can confirm now the device the suspect was wearing was not viable. Plato has been stood down. Plato, of course, was initiated this morning. However, major incident status does remain. We're working to get answers to other questions asked earlier as soon as we're able to, and we will update you proactively. Of course, those questions are, as I mentioned to you earlier, Martin, for example, the identity of the attacker, the identity of the two people who were also arrested. But that is a big question that people had this morning. It was about the potential device that he was wearing. It now seems that, as was speculated, he may just have been wearing something that looked like a device. We saw on his belt those white pouches almost. That was now, it seems, just to spread more terror, to spread more concern in the local area. But as we can now confirm that that was the case. It was not a viable device that the suspect this morning, who was shot by Greater Manchester Police, that the device he was wearing was not viable.
Sophie Reaper, thanks for that update there, live from the scene in Crumpsall. Just to repeat that, if you're tuning into GB News, we approach 5:30. The suicide device, the belt worn by today's suspect, now deceased, was not viable, so it wouldn't have gone off. But it's key to point out that nobody at that synagogue would have known that when he was he rammed into a crowd with his car and pulled out, as you can see, pictures on your screen now, has a large knife, and that belt around his midriff there, you can see, now has been confirmed as a non-viable, non-explosive device. But just to repeat, the Chief Constable for Greater Manchester, Stephen Watson, at a press conference around about an hour and a half ago now, pointed out that the immediate bravery of security and worshippers meant that that individual did not get inside that synagogue, and they didn't know that it was fake. They still risked everything to stop him. But it has been confirmed in these past few moments that was a non-viable device around his waist. We saw incredible pictures of a robotic bomb disposal device around the corpse of this individual. Now, it's been confirmed non-viable, but of course, all of those precautions had to be taken. And that, of course, delayed the identification of this individual until the crime scene was deemed to be safe. Chris Hope, we're expecting the Prime Minister to emerge in a few moments' time. Any more political reactions so far?
No, I'm going through it now on my computer here, Martin. Kemi Badenoch there, interesting that she is talking about the issue, the hostility in this country over Gaza and trying to dial it down. The atmosphere of significant hostility, she says, towards Jewish people. I think that's where the political conversation goes. How do we dial it down? Gaza is a humanitarian tragedy. Israel has done that in response to the attacks on 7th of October. We have to separate out that conversation from looking after the Jewish community here. They are different things, and I think that is where the politics is going to be going shortly. We'll be hearing from the Prime Minister, I would say, within the next quarter of an hour, talking to the nation somehow.
Thank you, Chris Oberlin. Please stick with me till the end of the show. We're expecting the Prime Minister to emerge shortly to give a statement to the nation, and indeed the world will be listening into this. They'll be waking up in America. The news will be rippling around the world. The shameful incident of a terror attack at a synagogue in Manchester. Thanks to Lee Anderson for joining me on today's show. Let's bring in my next guest now. And that is the founder of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, Fayaz Magal. Fayaz, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have your company. What's your response to this dark, sinister and grotesque attack today?
Well, it is a very dark day, and sadly, the communities in Manchester are picking up, within Jewish communities, are picking up the sad price of anti-Semitism. Look, I need to be also clear. I have worked on tackling anti-Semitism for many, many years. And the reality is that there are very few practitioners who are providing interventions against Islamist extremism. And so this is one of the biggest problems, that actually Islamist extremism continues to be an ongoing problem. And with Islamist extremism comes anti-Semitism. So the nation is not fully resourced within the prevent strategy and within the counter-terrorism strategy to be able to deal with Islamist extremism. And this has been going on for a number of years.
Fayaz Magal, of course, we don't know the specific modus operandi of this instance. We don't know the specific motivation of this deceased terror attacker. Parking that to one side, you're absolutely correct in the broader terms. We clearly have a big problem. But how many more times can we keep saying this? The Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. We've seen terror attacks at Borough Market, at London Bridge, at Parliament itself. This isn't news. It's happening time and time again, and we still don't seem to have got to the bottom of it. What on earth do we need to do to stamp this cancer out?
Well, you're absolutely right. Talking about kumbaya politics, we are seeing the kumbaya politics today. Muslims and Jews together. Yes, there's a place for that political life. But actually, that is not the full answer. The full answer is to properly go after extremist groups, is to enforce groups who get the government shilling to challenge these extremist groups. Look, I can tell you from my 20 years of counter-extremism experience that groups getting the public purse are even keeping quiet publicly when they should be challenging extremist narratives, challenging anti-Semitism, and challenging the cancer within. And so we need to take a far more vocalized, robust, clear, targeted approach to tackle the narratives of extremism and to tackle the issues within. And I'll tell you now, we don't clearly know what the motivation is, but it is pointing to Islamist extremism. And there are less and less Muslims in the public sphere talking about this because of the fear that they also suffer themselves. Today is about standing with Jewish communities, but it's also about targeting the Islamist extremism problem.
But more people do need to talk out from the Muslim community. And, the founder of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, Fayaz Magal, you're clearly doing that. Haven't we reached the point, though, where silence is not compliance, but silence is shameful? We've gone past the point now where people should even be allowed to keep quiet about this. It emboldens terrorist activity, and we're only 5 days away from the second anniversary of the Hamas invasion of Israel. It feels like in Britain we're going backwards.
We have gone backwards. Look, I can tell you, when I started this work just after 7/7 with the Blair administration at that point, there were more Muslims willing to stand up and publicly speak against extremism. I can honestly tell you, I can only pick a handful of those individuals still left speaking. And many people will take the easy kumbaya, we're all in this together. Yes, we're all in this together. But let's speak about the problem. And actually, my call is this. This government is again doing the same thing of just providing more energy to kumbaya politics. I say very clearly, those taking government grant funding from any government department must be under a stipulation to challenge extremism within their communities where they find it. And that goes for Muslim groups who take the government shilling. They must speak out against Islamist extremism, which we know, I know as a Muslim, working 30 years in this area, is a festering cancer that needs dealing with.
As well as taking or putting what's the word I'm looking for? Putting conditions upon the acceptance of public funds. By the way, I think that's an eminently sensible idea. Surely anybody who represents the Muslim community in Britain on a public level, if you're taking public money, has a due responsibility to stare into the mirror, into the community itself and say, as Muslims, we must stand up against extremists. And let's be absolutely brutal about this, Fayaz Magal. Those extremists are giving the entire Muslim community a bad name, while the Muslim community throwing their own bad prophets out, their own bad faith actors. They're causing immense damage to the Muslim community themselves.
Well, this is the approach I've taken. The fact of the matter is, my first allegiance is to human life in Britain. My first allegiance is to human life. Doesn't matter what human life, where it comes from. People need to be defended. That is my first allegiance. And actually, my Islam teaches me that actually doesn't matter who is under threat, you stand with them to protect their dignity and their life. And I am fed up to the back teeth about this kumbaya politics as an approach, which is also fomented by this government. I don't want to get political, but there is a narrative that's, oh, well, we're all in this together. Yes, we are. But the reality is, we all know, the Home Office knows, the Home Office doesn't have enough practitioners intervening to challenge Islamists who are identified. We all know there's a problem, yet few are willing to speak out. And this is the time where we need to not just get serious. We had the Ariana Grande attack, killing multiple young people. We've had terrorist attacks, 7/7, you name it, we've had it. It is time we do a greater focus on protecting the public by calling the problem out. And that means within my co-religionists. Now, I know a vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving, getting on. But that is not the problem. The problem is we need to speak out, identify, and work with security services to find and get these people out of the system.
Fayaz Magal, we can only hope and pray that the Prime Minister, the government, the authorities, the police, everybody with a voice and influence in Britain is listening to what you're saying today. I absolutely think you're right. We have to draw a line in the sand. No more lighting candles. No more don't look back in anger. No more thoughts and prayers. No more hollow words. The time to act is upon us. The founder of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, Fayaz Magal, thank you very, very much for your brave and forthright and common sense words on the show today. It's a pleasure to have your company. Thank you very, very much indeed. Now, I'm about to be joined by the former SAS officer and security expert, Matthew Hellier. But before that, just been joined by Chris Hope, who's just come into the studio. Chris, can I quickly get from you an idea of timescale? The Prime Minister, we believe, is about to address the nation with the outcome of that Cobra meeting. Of course, it's been called back for an emergency meeting from Copenhagen. What's the latest?
Yes, we are expecting a statement from the Prime Minister imminently. It will be broadcast on GBNews as soon as we get it. I'm just looking through that. As things stand, we're waiting to hear from them. The concern, I think, from the Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister, Gideon Saar, failing to take action to curb a toxic wave of anti-Semitism in the UK. Israel says that is the challenge facing the PM as he works out what to say and to give us the update of that really important Cobra meeting.
And we've seen very, very strong words from the Israeli administration saying shame on you for recognising the state of Palestine. The Labour government, of course, made that one of their headline policies at conference this week. There's a lot of tensions between Britain and Israel even before today, Chris Hope. Chris, stick with us for the rest of the show because when that statement lands, we need to analyse it in full. Let's get now to that guest, former SAS officer and security expert, Matthew Hellier. Matthew, a pleasure to have your company, even on this truly, I believe, dark, shameful day, a stain on Britain and our entire outlook on the Jewish community. What are your thoughts? Where do you want to start? Do you want to talk about the security and how we responded, or the broader issue of what this says about us as a nation worldwide?
Well, number one, condolences to the Jewish community. Again, they're at the forefront of terrorism. It's appalling what's going on in this country. And again, we must praise our security services, and let's not forget those amazing security guards that do it for minimal wage and put their life in the line to protect, the general public. And, thanks for everything you do. Where do I stand on this? I'm appalled at what's been going on. The rhetoric of all political parties is disgusting at the moment. The Prime Minister, I feel, has had fuel to the fire on this, by siding with Palestine, not really looking at the problem of Palestine and Israel, trying to stay neutral, trying to really, I know they are trying hard, but we must try harder for peace, and we must not side. And I think by siding with Palestine, what it's done, it's opened up almost carte blanche for these terrorists to think that they can attack citizens of this country, and the Jewish community are at the brunt of this again, albeit the police response was fantastic. Op Plato was called, and I know that the police, the security services and the SAS, they train by day and by night on Op Plato, hoping that this would never come into practice. Again, it's come into practice. The police have been bang on. Their response times were phenomenal. We've seen the helicopters from 22 Special Air Service above. They'll be hunting and arresting anyone that is involved. And, mark my words, if you're involved in this terrorist attack, the boys are coming and they're going to arrest you. Your time is up. An appalling time.
Matthew Hellier, you and I speak often on this show about, you've been in many, many combat situations yourself. You have to make split-second decisions, often, as we talk about on previous shows, that come back to haunt soldiers and operatives many, many years later. But back to today, we have an individual, it's been divulged in this past 20 minutes or so, that the explosive device around his midriff was non-viable, a fake, if you like, a bogus device. But the point is, nobody knew that. It was there. None of the brave security officers or even the everyday, humble, beautiful Jewish worshippers knew that. And certainly the individuals, right down to the man who pulled the trigger and took this guy out. He didn't know that. And in your mind, absolutely unequivocally, he did the right thing.
Martin, I can tell you firsthand, I've been behind that rifle where there has been devices in front of me. I have seen the destruction and absolute chaos that these IEDs, personal IEDs, these suicide bombers can have on the population, the people around you. That police officer had a split second. What he see, he must have, his dynamic risk assessment, he made the right decision. He needed to stop that terrorist in his tracks. Otherwise, he didn't know. There could have been hundreds of fatalities like we see in Manchester not so long ago at the Ariana Grande concert. He done the right thing. And unfortunately for that police officer and all the armed guys that are involved in this incident, you know what? You know what's going to happen? They're going to get their rifles taken off them. They're going to be
Matthew Hellier, we have to interrupt. Sir Keir Starmer is addressing the nation. Let's cross to that.
Good evening. Earlier today, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day for the Jewish community, a vile individual committed a terrorist attack that attacked Jews because they are Jews, and attacked Britain because of our values. So many Jewish families first came to this country as a place of refuge, fleeing the greatest evil ever inflicted on a people. And Britain welcomed them. Communities like the one attacked in Manchester provided safety, but also the security that comes from a promise that this is a country that stands up to hatred, and that we don't just provide refuge, we provide a home. For so many Jewish families, that is the story of Britain. But Britain is also a country where Jewish buildings, synagogues, even schools require round-the-clock protection, where dedicated specialist security is necessary because of the daily threat of anti-Semitic hatred. Today's horrific incident shows why. And while this is not a new hate, this is something Jews have always lived with, we must be clear. It is a hatred that is rising once again, and Britain must defeat it once again. On behalf of the nation, I want to offer my condolences to the families and victims affected. I want to thank the Greater Manchester Police, the first responders, and those dedicated security specialists. There is no doubt whatsoever that they have prevented an even greater tragedy, and we thank them for their bravery. But to every Jewish person in this country, I also want to say this. I know how much fear you will be holding inside of you. I really do. And so, on behalf of our country, I express my solidarity, but also my sadness that you still have to live with these fears. Nobody should have to do that. Nobody. And so I promise you that I will do everything in my power to guarantee you the security that you deserve, starting with a more visible police presence protecting your community. I promise you that over the coming days, you will see the other Britain, the Britain of compassion, of decency, of love. And I promise you that this Britain will come together to wrap our arms around your community and show you that Britain is a place where you and your family are safe, secure, and belong. Thank you.
Sir Keir Starmer there addressing the nation after an emergency Cobra meeting pulled back from Copenhagen with a bitter irony, an international security summit to address this appalling security tragedy on British soil. Sir Keir Starmer there began by saying that people were attacked. Jews were attacked simply because they are Jews. And he talks about Britain offering solace. They fled to Britain, fleeing the greatest evil in history. Sir Keir Starmer continued. This is a country that stands up to evil to offer refuge. He said, but unfortunately, synagogues and schools need round-the-clock protection, and today shows why. Chris Hope, you listened into that again, and I was really struck by the one particular phrase, this is a hatred that is rising once again. But Chris Hope, a lot of people have been saying this hatred has been rising for at least the past 2 years, and today is a grim wake-up call that many in our political class didn't seem to hear until it's too late.
Well, it's early days. We heard the PM there say there'll be more security around synagogues. You know that from this morning on the tarmac of Copenhagen Airport. He said, he optimistically said, and let's hope it's the case, that the arms of our communities will be opened up to Jewish people in coming days. But what else will he do? What else? Will he be meeting with leaders from that community to reassure them? Will there be any support, maybe some financial support for the privately provided security? What more can they do?
Chris, I've sat here for these past 3 hours trying to make sense of this with Jewish commentators from all around the world. And they've repeatedly told me they don't want security. Right. Security shows we've failed. Security and armed cops, CCTV, security guards, that's a visible sign we've failed the Jewish community. They don't want that. They want this cancer to go away, and that doesn't go away with security. It goes away with education, and if necessary, putting people in prison, clamping down on this hatred, doing something visible about it,
and dialing down rhetoric. I think the PM, of course, his wife is Jewish. He observes the Friday night ritual as part of the Jewish faith. So I think he was talking from the heart there. But yeah, I mean, where we want to hear more maybe about dialing down the rhetoric, as we heard from Kevin Badenoch earlier. The concern about Palestine and Israel is well meant, but and correct to talk about that. But of course, what about the Jewish people here?
Standing aside from today's appalling incident, do you think the Labour Party has been dialing down the rhetoric in this past week around racism and how poisonous Britain is, pointing out the divisions, the far right? You know, I mean, seriously, are we at a point where the entire political class needs to take a long, hard look in the mirror and say, stop revving the country up? Because here we are today and we're facing a disaster in the face. Chris Hope, stick with us. We need to cross back live now to Crumpsall, the scene of the incident, and speak to GBNews reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, what's the latest?
What were you saying to me about... Is the mic all right?
Well, Martin, it's been a shocking day here in Crumpsall today. It's the most important day on the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur. Many of the Jewish faith in this area will have woken with the plans to go along to their local synagogue at Heaton Park to worship and to mark this incredibly important day. But instead, what happened was something that I think no one would have believed. It was a terrorist incident in which a suspect drove his vehicle into the gates of the synagogue, and then a witness said he proceeded to stab anyone who was close to him. We now know that 2 members of the public were killed in the incident and that 4 are now still in hospital as a result. We also know that the perpetrator was shot and killed by GMP armed officers. We know as well, in the last few moments, we've heard from Greater Manchester Police, and they've confirmed that what was initially believed to perhaps be an explosive belt that he was wearing was not a viable device. They've also confirmed that Plato, which is the national response to marauding terrorism, has also been stood down, although a major incident does still remain in place. Now, this is an incredibly difficult day, not just for those of this community, not just for those of the Jewish faith. It's very difficult for all those around the country who can see that this is so horrifying, what has taken place today. Now, of course, there will continue to be developments on this story. Anna Riley, my colleague, will be picking up in the next few hours. She'll be live with any developments that may come into the newsroom, and I'll be back with you with any live developments from tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock on GB News Breakfast. We'll be bringing you any live developments that we get.
Thank you, Sophie, for your excellent reporting today. You're right there in the heart of the action as that investigation continues. The forensic team behind you earlier now in full effect. That's a full crime scene, and more information will come out. We do know that the individual's identity is known. The police have decided not to release that yet, they say, because their investigations are ongoing. Let's bring in my next guest now. See a picture there on screen. That is the deceased. As you can see there, carrying a large knife with a vest that appears to be either a bulletproof or a stab-proof vest, and the device around his midriff, we now understand, was a fake. It's a non-viable bomb, but of course nobody at the time knew that, least of all the officer, the brave officer who pulled the trigger to end this situation in a way that Matthew Hellier, a former SAS operative and security expert, believes was entirely the correct thing to do to take control of a very chaotic situation. Let's bring in my final guest of the day. That's the former Manchester mayoral candidate, Nick Buckley, who joins me now. Nick, you're a Manc lad, you live up there, you speak a lot about what you see as a very politically divided and toxic environment in Manchester. There's a crushing sense of inevitability in many ways, Nick Buckley, about what's happened today.
Yes, there is. Is anybody surprised? Are you surprised? Am I surprised that another Islamic terrorist attack has happened again in the UK?
We don't know at this stage that it's an Islamic terror attack. You know, let's not speculate. The police haven't released that. But anyway, go on.
We know it's an Islamic terrorist attack. The police can advise us, but let's put that to one side. We knew another attack was coming. An attack is always coming. I just heard the Prime Minister give his speech there. At no point does he mention the problem. We don't know who committed this. Is it far right? Was it Christians? Is it Hindus? Is it foreigners? Who's committed this awful atrocity on our soil? He doesn't want to get into it. And that's the big problem here. Our political class, none of our politicians actually want to discuss the problem. We know what the problem is, and nobody has the backbone to discuss it, to address it, and try to stop it, because it's connected to votes, it's connected to community cohesion. And until we get a backbone, we're never going to solve this problem.
Entirely agree that we have to have a full and frank and, you know, expansive conversation about how we got to this point. Just to repeat, you know, we don't know the motives behind this incident yet. The police will announce that in time, and we have to be careful to speculate. We just have to follow the due process. As tiresome and as painful as that can be, that's just the world we live in, particularly in broadcast journalism. But I want to get back to your point. You're entirely right that I think we've been long overdue to have a full and frank conversation about the failure of cultural integration in Britain, and particularly to the point, Nick Buckley, where we're now seeing that the Jewish community today are being told by Keir Starmer that we love you and want to throw our arms around you to make you feel welcome. But the Jewish community have been feeling anything but love for the past 2 years, at least, since the terrible invasion by Hamas of Israel.
So since 2 years ago, since we had those terrorist attacks in Israel, Manchester Jews do not go to Manchester city centre on a Saturday afternoon because they're not welcome, because we have between hundreds and thousands of people demonstrating against Israel. So they say, and some of them are there just because of Israel. And I get that. But then underneath that, you hear the chanting, you see their faces. Many people are using this to have a go at the Jews and are blaming the Jews for what Israel does. Israel is an independent, sovereign country. You cannot blame other people around the world because of what one sovereign country does. It's like me blaming all Muslims for what Turkey does. You just wouldn't do it. But Israel seems to be a fair target. And British Jews are being persecuted because of a foreign country. And let's get to the core of this issue. The core of this issue is immigration. We've imported this problem into the UK. Jews have always had a hard time, and we got rid of that problem in the UK. But over the last 2-3 decades, we've imported it back into the UK, and nobody wants to discuss it.
Nick Buckley, on a day of genuine, and almost overwhelming darkness, I would like to try and highlight something which I think has just been astonishing, really, and it's like as a ray of hope. And when Stephen Watson, the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, told us that it was individual private security guards and even Jewish worshippers that stepped in to stop this individual getting inside the synagogue, they didn't know that the device around his waist has now been proved to be non-viable. They didn't have a clue about that. They just did what they thought was right. And they stepped in and they stopped him. And they undeniably made today's tragedy, as grotesque as it is, it could have been much, much worse.
Brave people. Nobody knows they're brave until you're in that situation. We all think, I'll tackle him, I'll do a kung fu kick, I'll kick the knife out of his hand. None of us know what we're going to do until we're in that situation. And then we discover if we're brave or not. And those individuals were all brave.
Nick Buckley, we're expecting to hear from, we just heard from the Prime Minister a short while ago, beg your pardon. You listened in to his speech. Do you think that there's anything that he can really say now that's going to persuade the Jewish community that he's got their back and that they're safe? Because many people feel that the direction of travel of the Labour government, certainly, they've been very, very pro-Palestine, and we've heard some very, very condemnatory words from the Jewish ambassador who just feels that Britain has almost abandoned Israel.
Again, we're conflating Israel with British Jews, and that's part of the problem. The Labour Party has made a conscious decision. They did it with the grooming gangs. They made a conscious decision that Muslim votes are are worth having in this country for them. They're worth having. So therefore, we have to let certain other people go, and they let the Jews go. And now we're seeing it with Free Palestine, and now we're seeing the Muslim community, creating their own independent MPs. And the Labour Party is doing what the Labour and all political parties do. This is all politics to them. It's all politics. How do we get elected again? How do I keep my seat? There's only 300,000 Jews in the UK. There's millions of Muslims. I know which one's more important to a politician. And what we need politicians who are backbone, politicians who love this country more than their career, and they start saying and creating policies that say, we live in this country with one rule of law, and we're all treated equal, and I don't care how many votes you bring to the table. You live here and you're under the one law, and we need to treat everybody the same, and we need to protect everybody, but we don't, because we have a two-tier system. And for the last few years, Jews are at the bottom of that system.
Nick Buckley, thanks for your thoughts. We have to leave it there. Simply run out of time. We're coming towards the end of today's show. Quick, 20 seconds. Chris Hope, what's the latest? What's going to happen next?
Well, we're waiting to see what the PM will do to deliver on that. The language of tonight, it will be in the headlines tomorrow. He says this is not a new hate, anti-Semitism. This is something Jews always live with. We must be clear, it's a hatred arising once again in the UK. That will set the agenda for the next few days. What will
Thank you very much, Chris Hope. It is 6 p.m. You've been with me for the last 3 hours. Up next is Jubes & Co. Let's go to Michelle Dewberry.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. Absolutely shocking scenes unfolded on the streets of Britain this morning. A terror attack yet again, but this time the target specifically, very directly, British Jews. Let's take a moment. If you're just tuning in, I will take you back to some footage that captured the start of the incident.
We've killed him. No, hell, they're just
everybody else, get back! If you're not involved, move back! Get away! Somebody stay with casualties! Everybody else, he has a bomb! Go away!
He's got a bomb on him! He's got a bomb! Mate, he's got a... Man, he's got a bomb on his jacket, mate! He's trying to go in and... Now! He's got bombs on him!
2 innocent people killed, 4 people injured in hospital. Our Prime Minister has just addressed the nation. Let's take a listen.
Earlier today, on Yom Kippur, the holiest day for the Jewish community, a vile individual committed a terrorist attack that attacked Jews because they are Jews, and attacked Britain because of our values. So many Jewish families first came to this country as a place of refuge, fleeing the greatest evil ever inflicted on a people. And Britain welcomed them. Communities like the one attacked in Manchester provided safety, but also the security that comes from a promise that this is a country that stands up to hatred, and that we don't just provide refuge, we provide a home. For so many Jewish families, that is the story of Britain. But Britain is also a country where Jewish buildings, synagogues, even schools require round-the-clock protection, where dedicated specialist security is necessary because of the daily threat of anti-Semitic hatred. Today's horrific incident shows why. And while this is not a new hate, this is something Jews have always lived with, we must be clear. It is a hatred that is rising once again, and Britain must defeat it once again. On behalf of the nation, I want to offer my condolences to the families and victims affected. I want to thank the Greater Manchester Police, the first responders, and those dedicated security specialists. There is no doubt whatsoever that they have prevented an even greater tragedy, and we thank them for their bravery. But to every Jewish person in this country, I also want to say this. I know how much fear you will be holding inside of you. I really do. And so, on behalf of our country, I express my solidarity, but also my sadness that you still have to live with these fears. Nobody should have to do that. Nobody. And so I promise you that I will do everything in my power to guarantee you the security that you deserve, starting with a more visible police presence protecting your community. I promise you that over the coming days, you will see the other Britain, the Britain of compassion, of decency, of love. And I promise you that this Britain will come together to wrap our arms around your community and show you that Britain is a place where you and your family are safe, secure, and belong.
Dear, dear me. What do you think to the things that have unfolded today, to the response of that Prime Minister, our Prime Minister there? I wonder how you feel in particular if you are a Jewish member of our society. Over the next hour, we're going to try and work our way through this together, ladies and gents. Absolutely horrific day. And it goes almost without saying that our thoughts, all of us, myself and everybody else here at GB News, are with everybody affected, those people that have lost innocent loved ones. And of course, all of those people whose loved ones fighting now for their health, for their lives in hospital. Absolutely disgraceful scenes that we have seen on the streets of Britain. There are so many questions to be asked. We'll try and work our way through them all. Alongside me over the next hour, I'll have a variety of guests, but also my panel tonight. I've got the head of comms at Popular Conservatism, Annunciata Rees-Mogg, and I've got the co-founder of Novara Media,